Good morning and welcome. I am Councillor Mary McLaren and I'm chairing this meeting today. So I would like to remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use and that you do not interrupt other speakers. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones and laptops are on silent. Additionally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app. I would like to remind everyone present this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. So I'd like to welcome the following people to our meeting. So, officers in attendance, we've got Mark Ems, Director for Operations, Nick Christo, Corporate Manager for Public Realm, and Stephen Stroud, Strategic Projects and Delivery Manager. We also have John Robinson, Corporate Manager of Law and Governance, and on my left is Alicia Norman, who's the Lead Officer for Overview and Scrutiny. We also would like to welcome our external representatives. We have Grant Tufts, Regional Engagement Manager from Anglian Water, Natasha Kenny, Head of Quality Regulation and Enforcement from Anglian Water. We also like to welcome Ben Marshall, Senior Environmental Officer for the Environment Agency, Alison Parnell, Area Environment Manager from the Environment Agency. That's difficult to say, actually, isn't it? And on Teams, we're joined by I'd like to welcome Nicholas Berthold, Senior Advisor for Natural England via Teams, and John Kemp, the River Stour Trust on Teams. Welcome to all of you to our meeting. Can I move to the agenda, please? Can we have apologies for absence and substitutions? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This morning we have apologies from Councillors Scarf, Rowe, Pearson, Jameson, Caston and Piper. And substituting this morning we have Councillors Marriott, Matheson, Warboys and Carruthers. Thank you, Chair.
Item 2. To receive declarations of pecuniary and other registrable or non-registrable interests by members. No. Item 3. JOS/23/14 to confirm the minutes of the joint meeting held on the 21st of August 2023. Members, do we have any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes? No? Could I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Grandon, and a seconder, Councillor Wyman. The lead officer will now conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress. Councillor Carter. Councillor Riley, can I take your vote verbally, please? Thank you. And Hello, Councillor Marriott. Councillor Marriott, I'm quite happy to take your vote verbally.
In favour. I didn't introduce Tom.
Councillor Marriott, could I take your vote verbally because it's not come through on my screen? It's for the minutes. So, would you like to abstain? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So that makes 5 votes for and 5 abstentions. That's carried.
Minutes of the joint meeting on the 21st of August 2023 have been confirmed. Before I continue, I am very sorry I did not welcome the Director of Planning. I'm sorry about that. I think you snuck in there, didn't see you. Welcome, Tom. To receive, so item 4, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Item 5, questions by the public.
None received.
And item 6, questions by councillors.
None received, Chair. Thank you.
Right, we'll go on to the main item of our agenda, which is item 7, and that is JOS/23/15. Review on current levels of untreated sewage discharges to waters in Babergh and Mid Suffolk. I would like to invite the, with no cabinet members, I would like to invite the officers, which will be Mark Ems, to introduce the report to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Concerns over river quality and sewage discharge events have been repeatedly raised by our councillors and our communities who are worried about the impacts on both our natural environment and public health. In November 2022, both councils debated motions on this topic. As a result of this, the councils asked the Chair of the Scrutiny Committee to invite senior officers of Anglia Water plus representatives from the Environment Agency and Natural England to attend a meeting to answer questions on the current levels of sewage discharge. Officers have provided an information bulletin for this meeting which sets out the stakeholders' responsibilities, the background and the local context to this problem. Officers do not make any recommendations to ONS members in respect of river quality or sewage discharge into rivers. Members have been asked to note the information contained within the bulletin when considering questioning of attendees and of course their own research and experience in this area. I understand our external invitees will all now introduce their positions on this matter and then members will be able to ask their questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I would like now to invite the external companies in attendance to make their introductions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. My name is Grant Tufts, Regional Engagement Manager from Anglian Water. We're here today to answer questions, but also we've got a small deck of slides we might thought we'd run through beforehand to give some context, a bit more about Anglian Water and some answers to hopefully your questions that you're going to raise later, but we're here to answer any further ones. So, do you want to introduce yourself, Tash?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Natasha Kenny. I'm Head of Quality Regulation and Enforcement here at Anglian Water, and I'll be helping Grant with the presentation today.
Okay, so yeah, if you look at the screen, we'll go through some slides. Just a bit of background on Anglian Water, just for some context, for those who don't know. We're the biggest water company by geographical area in England, covering all of East Anglia, bits of Lincolnshire, across to west of Cambridge and beyond into parts of Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire. We've got a big low-lying flat region, which brings certain challenges to us as an organisation. We've got 5,000 people in Anglian Water, serving 7 million customers. We do have a lot of say, those climate challenges, particularly the low rainfall point, and also one of the fastest growing regions in the UK beyond London. A lot of houses being proposed, stop and starting, as you might have heard recently, but it's back on the agenda. And also we manage lots and lots of assets, particularly sewers, 76,000 kilometres of sewers, about 38,000 kilometres of water mains as well. So we're a big company, but we're committed to protecting the environment and looking after the people that we serve very well. Just a brief picture on our strategy, just to explain what sort of company we are. 4 key goals Anglian Water put out in 2020-2025, our current 5-year business plan, about making our lives better for our customers, to deliver our plan on behalf of those customers, and along those priorities, and create a sustainable future for the region. So it's something really dear to our heart. In fact, we changed our Articles of Association about 4 or 5 years ago within our company, through shareholders and our owners, to become more purpose-driven as an organisation. So you can read a lot more about that on our website, but we're really proud of that. We're the first utility to do that, and we stand by the environmental and social decisions in all of our operations. So it is what our belief is. Along our long-term strategy, you can imagine water companies are here for the long term, and we have long-term ambitions to help the environment as well. Things like being net zero, improving the ecological quality of the catchments we look after, making the East of England resilient to flooding and drought, which is something we're very mindful of given the climate impacts, and also looking at sustainable growth. We're very supportive of growth if it's done the right way, and we're again working with all sorts of partners, including our colleagues today, the Environment Agency and others, to make sure that any development is a sustainable development for the region. One of the things obviously we're here to talk about today is rivers and the river health, and I'm pleased to announce that we've had an anniversary recently of our Get River Positive initiative, which is shared with another one of our neighbouring water companies, Severn Trent, and we've got 5 key commitments of that pledge to look after rivers, improve rivers, which is basically, as you can see on the right, it's ensuring storm overflows and sewage treatment works and abstraction do not harm rivers, create more opportunities for everybody to enjoy our rivers, support others to care for rivers, and lots of partnership working, including with local authorities like yourselves, hopefully, enhance our rivers and create new habitats for wildlife, again, something we're really keen to do, reintroducing species and things like that, and also be more open and transparent about our data. We actually acknowledge there's been a bit of a black hole historically in access to data, and something we're going to get onto later, and Tash, my colleague, will explain a bit more about that. But this is a campaign that's been embedded now for a year. Lots of success stories. Do please visit the website. We can share the slide deck afterwards with the committee, with links and things to these websites. But it's something really dear to our hearts. I'm really proud of this endeavour. Moving on to sort of the current sort of en vogue topic in the industry and on the media. We welcome this scrutiny, to be honest. We always come to these meetings. We've been to one before with Suffolk County Council in this very room earlier this year, and me and my colleagues go around to lots of other local authorities when we're asked to do, and we're very pleased and happy to come and talk to you and talk about this really important subject. But just some statistics about setting the scene. We invest a lot in the environment. In fact, £811 million in the current 5-year cycle. That's going to double the next 5 years, from 2025 to 2030 to almost £1.6 billion we're predicting on improving the environment. So we actually are committed to do this. In terms of sort of CSOs, Natasha will explain a bit more about that later, but just to give you some statistics about combined sewer overflows, or storm overflows as we call them, they contribute just 4% of the reasons why UK rivers are not in good quality. And in the East of England, that's only 1%. So there's lots of data about this, and again, we can explain a bit more about that later, but just some context about our impact on rivers probably isn't as severe as maybe you might read or think or assume from what you might see in the media. There are lots of other factors, and we're here alongside the Environment Agency to help you talk through those. As you see the bullets there, agriculture, urban runoff, non-native species, disconnected connections. So Good example, we did some surveys recently in a couple of villages in Cambridgeshire and one in Essex, and we found that 25% of the surface water connections to the properties are plumbed straight into the sewer network. So basically that means that we're treating rainwater from people's roofs and gardens into our sewers, which shouldn't really be. They should be going straight into the environment. We shouldn't be treating it. So things like that, facts and figures that we want to share. I won't go into detail on the investment, but it's safe to say that we are putting our money where our mouth is and spending millions of pounds on trying to prevent storm overflows from happening and reduce their impact on the environment. Bathing water quality is particularly prevalent for us, particularly on our coastal regions, but we're also starting to look at bathing water quality inland as well, as you might have heard. And the future really is about having a plan, which we've already delivered to DEFRA, on tackling those storm overflows and improving rivers. Also working with planning colleagues on the automatic right to connect, which is an anomaly of the planning legislation where any developer can connect to our assets without us being statutory consortees. We're now lobbying, and we've now managed to get that into the plan for water that Therese Kofi submitted earlier this year. So hopefully through a consultation this year, water companies will have that right to oppose development if it means there's going to be pollution or impact on the environment. So we're pleased to be lobbying on that. Equally, banning on plastics in wet wipes. Again, that's something that's in that plan for water that we've been lobbying hard over the years, because the impact of wet wipes in sewers is quite marked, and you'll see some statistics later that explain that blockages are one of our major causes of pollutions in the environment. So again, banning plastic in wet wipes, which basically prevents blockages in sewers overflowing, is another good step. Just moving on to sort of the transparency point, we do publish lots of information about our performance and our storm overflows retrospectively. We've got a couple of maps. One is our Get River Positive storm overflow map, which is live on our website now. That's got historical data that's been validated from last year. We're working towards having live data by the end of this year, and Natasha will speak about that a bit later on. We also have an interactive investment and operational map called In Your Area, which again shows live data of where things are happening in our region, also investment decisions and schemes we're delivering. So we are becoming more and more transparent, and we want to share more information, but there is more of that coming up. So I'll hand over to Natasha to go through storm overflows, and I'll hold the thing.
Thanks, Grant. So I'm just going to talk a little bit in more detail about storm overflows, what they are and how they cover this particular region. So storm overflows are located on combined sewers. So a combined sewer is a sewer that accepts both sewage and rainfall, surface water, into one catchment. And most of these types of sewers were built from Victorian times up until the 1960s and 70s. And storm overflows are located on these systems because when they become inundated with periods of rainfall or snowmelt, these overflow points will release excess water to the environment to prevent homes and businesses from flooding, because it's a combined system. These storm overflows are permitted by the Environment Agency because they have very low or no impact on the receiving watercourse. And the reason why they have low or no impact is because the majority of what they release to the watercourse is rainwater, and they are discharging into a river that's receiving a lot of rainwater too, so it's a very dilute mix that ends up in that water in the environment. We have been installing event duration monitors on our storm overflows since 2018. So this was a new requirement for us to install these types of monitors. So we would know exactly, we could count up how often they spill to the environment. We will have 100% of our storm overflows in the Anglian region with event duration monitors in place by December 2023. So the event duration monitors will tell us for how long our storm overflows discharge for and count up how many times they discharge. These allow us to have a better visibility of our sewer network, and if they are not performing as expected, for example, if they're performing outside of rainfall or snow melt conditions, we're able to take action and invest where necessary. We've currently got about 87% of our storm overflows with event duration monitoring in place. And as I've said earlier, we'll achieve 100% coverage by December 2023. The data that our EDMs collect is sent off to the Environment Agency on a regular basis. We also send it off to the Rivers Trust and we publish it on our website. We also use the information that these event duration monitors produce on a day-to-day basis. Following the activation, we will assess the data to determine if a spill has occurred. What we are finding is about 1/3 of the activations are false spill events, and that is because, as Grant mentioned earlier, because of external factors can influence these monitors from reading accurately. For example, when we get a lot of fat in the sewer, or if we get unflushables that cause blockages, we could end up with these false spill events because it gives us a false level in the sewer network. We are working with companies who provide these devices to improve accuracy and use alternative devices to improve the way in which we monitor spills. So we are focusing on continuously improving accuracy of storm overflow monitoring, and we are also looking to reduce spills to the environment as well. In 2022, our data showed that we had a reduction of 54% in spills in comparison to our 2021 return. So we've looked at the average spill per overflow in Babergh in 2022 was 9.5 per storm overflow, and in mid-Suffolk it was 12.45 per storm overflow. Figures show that we are also treating our wastewater 99% of the time, which means we hold the flows within our sewage system 99% of the time, so it's only that extra 1% that is being discharged to the environment through these storm overflows. We do have problems in our sewer network, and we do have pollution incidents that happen. This is something we don't want to happen, and we do focus on trying to minimise and eliminate these as much as we can. These event duration monitors help us to provide more visibility of what's going on in our catchments. And we had one incident caused by a blockage in 2023 in the mid-Suffolk area, and that and none in the Babergh area. That was classified as a minor pollution incident. So, as I've said, we're trying to focus on reducing storm spills to the environment, and we work with the Environment Agency on developing a 5-year programme, which is called our Water Industry National Environment Programme. And our 5-year programme is currently running between 2020 to 2025. And some of the figures here on us focusing on investing to reduce those spills to the environment includes £56 million being spent on increasing capacity at our water treatment works, £80 million on installing additional storm tanks, £23 million on increasing overflow monitoring and improving visibility, and £2.1 million on improving bathing water quality. We're increasing our sewer monitors over and above the event duration monitoring project by an extra 22,000 monitors going into our sewer network. As Grant says, we're working on our Get River Positive commitments, and we are also starting to use more artificial intelligence and data systems to improve the way in which we use all of the data that these devices provide us, so that we can be more proactive in preventing spills when they're operating outside of their permit conditions, so we can stop pollutions from happening. We've also invested this in this 5-year period on carrying out surveys on those storm overflows where they may be harming the environment, and we are investing in 11 locations across the Anglian Water region under the Storm Overflow and Asset Framework. So we are asked a lot about how do we eliminate storm overflows operating altogether, and that is a huge challenge. If we removed all storm overflows, it would require whole towns and cities to be replumbed, which would be very expensive and disruptive. So we are focused on reducing harm from our storm overflows. That is our priority. We have got currently 1,552 storm overflows in the Anglian region, and 61 of those are in the Babergh and Mid-Suffolk regions. In recent years, we've surrendered permits for over 16% of our storm overflows, so they no longer operate. But we also understand that by improving water quality, we need to work in partnership with the Rivers Trust, farmers, landowners and highways in order to jointly work together to reduce storm overflow, harm to rivers, and other reasons why rivers are not achieving good status. So we use our eventuation monitoring to drive investigations, and we will take action and report to the Environment Agency if any of our discharges are pollutions. And the Environment Agency performance assess us and take action against us if they think that we are not operating as a responsible sewerage undertaker. But we do resolve issues, and we make investment where a repair or replacement is required in our sewer network. Looking ahead, we will carry on reporting storm overflows, and as Grant says, we've got a map that shows our 2022 assessment data. However, we know that customers want to know information in near real time, so we are releasing a near-time reporting map of our storm overflow activities in December 2023, and we're working on that at the moment. We've submitted a storm overflow reduction plan to DEFRA, and that is due to be published very soon, so that will also be released imminently. And we're also submitting our business plan to Ofwat in October, and that will include a significant increase in investment to focus on storm overflows. Overall, it's £11 billion, but 1.6 billion of that is about improving schemes to improve the environment. That's nearly double the size of the plan that we are delivering in 2020 to 2025. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Grant and Natasha. Now what we're going to do is go through all the different agencies that are represented here before we go to questions. So I'd now like to invite Ben and Alison to speak on behalf of the Environment Agency. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. So Alison Parnell, I'm the Environment Manager for Suffolk, working for the Environment Agency. I don't have a deck of slides, but I'm really happy if we want some additional information sending through or some material to follow up. But I thought I'd just give you a little flavour of who we are, and then we'll see how the discussion goes through your questions when we get to that point. So primarily, the Environment Agency is the environment regulator. We have an ability to protect rivers, but that's very much focused on the environment, and I think you mentioned human health earlier, and that is less of a focus of the current regulations. And our ability to protect rivers is really driven by the regulations we have to hand, but also our available resources in terms of the funding we are given to achieve those regulations. When it comes to sewage discharges, as you've explained, we permit those. So the regular discharges that are occurring continuously from treated sewage effluent going into the river would have conditions that are covering the volume and the flow that is being discharged, but also some of the concentrations of pollutants. Primarily, this will be things like phosphate. So when you're looking at, I think in your paper it showed you some of the condition of status of the rivers in terms of the Water Framework Directive, which is actually the Water Environment Regulations UK. That is one of the primary drivers for the status of those rivers being in a less than favourable condition is phosphate, along with dissolved oxygen, and also plant growth in the rivers. Plant growth is primarily in rivers fuelled by phosphates. The more we can manage phosphates, but there are other substances we control through those permits. We're also here to hold the water company to account, and I think they can attest that we have done and we do. And this year we had one case against you for a permit breach in Essex, which resulted in a £2.5 million fine. So it's encouraging the courts are taking these matters more seriously too. So we do hold to account where we've got serious pollution. We also, as I think you've explained kindly, is we direct water company investment. We get involved at looking where we think the environment should be improved to meet the regulations and the work that can be done, and that helps inform your asset planning, working with Ofwat as to what that plan should be shaped like. But protecting the water environment is actually a really big challenge and one that we all play a part in. So whilst we do a lot of work in partnership, and part of the ethos of the water environment regulations is to work in partnership, and we work in partnership with Anglia Water. They have the means to come in and help bring about improvements to the environment. All public bodies have a duty of regard to the River Basin Plan, and the River Basin Plan is is the document that sets out the objectives and what we need to do to achieve better status in our rivers across Babergh and mid-Suffolk. So there's plenty we can be doing together, so it'd be helpful to perhaps have some discussions around how we can work together more to help improve the local environment. There's many things, from the misconnections you mentioned, invasive species, planning is a really big driver, even just your own assets, looking at water usage, have you got those misconnections, are any sewage treatment works that you might own, sewage treatment plants connected to any properties you have operating properly. Things that could seem small but collectively can really help. And then I think finally I'd just say, I suppose, climate change is bringing an increasing challenge. So we're getting differing weather, and that weather is becoming more unpredictable, and those volumes of water are becoming more intense, which brings the challenges back to those storm overflows. So there's a lot we need to be doing about how we're managing that heavy rainfall to prevent all of that rainwater going into the sewage systems and overwhelming our existing technical abilities to treat that sewage. And again, that's, I think, something we can come together. And then finally, it isn't just sewage that's impacting the rivers, land use, particularly agriculture. When you look, if you look at the proportional impacts between the water companies and agriculture actually has a slightly bigger impact on the quality of the environment. And again, heavy rainfall, agricultural practices, runoff, all exacerbate the condition and the health of our rivers. So I just give you a little bit of flavour of what we're about and see where the discussion takes us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Ben, are you going to? No. Okay. Mandy, can we go to our visitors who are on Teams? Thank you. Can I invite Nicholas to do his presentation on Natural England? Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you. Can I just do a quick check? Can you hear me sufficiently clearly?
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So, hello everybody. I'm Nick Bertolt. I'm, as introduced, Freshwater Senior Advisor for Natural England based in the Norfolk and Suffolk team. I'll give I don't have any slides or presentations, but I'll give a quick run through of how Natural England is working within the sort of water environment. And then, yes, like Alison said, see where the discussions and questions take us from there. That's okay. So, if I may, just start sort of from a slightly higher level and this sort of ecological level, and that sort of very simply, wetlands have what could be sort of almost distilled down to something of a trilogy of factors that, rivers and other wetlands that need to be right for them to thrive and be resilient for both the environment and people and how people use that environment. So that's sort of water quality, water supply, and then the habitat condition as well, which is sort of management, the extent and how people use it. So our approach is looking at all of those factors through all of the tools we can deliver to get that overall improvement in the water environment. So I'll sort of talk and think probably more widely than just CSOs for that. So Natural England, if I start at the sort of top and zoom into slightly more detail, we're there working to sort of support the delivery of the government's 25-year environment plan and the plan for water. and meeting those sort of government ambitions. And then Natural England have an action plan that shows how Natural England are going to do that, with a series of goals for delivery throughout the year. This year, Natural England is looking to maximise what's the impact of some of the new tools that have come in through the Environment Act that can deliver nature recovery, local nature recovery strategies, biodiversity net gain, for example. And one of the other priorities within there that's already been mentioned previously is collaborating both across government, regulators, and with partners to develop solutions to address these environmental pressures. And one of those aspects that's relevant to today is looking at these strategic water plans, so the Water Industry National Environment Programme that has already been mentioned, and other water company plans, and also we advise the Environment Agency on permits where they particularly affect protected sites. Now, having mentioned that, again, Alison mentioned that the regulatory framework within which the Environment Agency predominantly operates. Natural England has a regulatory framework similarly. A lot of our work is driven by the need to restore and protect protected sites, so that's sites of special scientific interest, SSSIs, special areas of conservation, SACs, and then Ramsars and other designated protected sites. So our main focus often can be slightly more narrowed down onto those protected sites rather than the wider river network, which sits more within the Environment Agency's regulatory remit. And then I'll just touch on some of the mechanisms that we use to help restore the environment. So protected sites, looking at the majority of the protected sites within the two local authorities areas are woodlands in number, which are sitting on the Suffolk clay, so they're more directly rainwater fed, so not so impacted by the surface water issues. They have plenty of issues of their own: climate change, invasive species, new diseases. Then looking at others just to the north of the area, the Redgrave and Lopham group of wetland sites are very, very special and really important, and their catchment and their groundwater recharge zones are within the local authorities areas. So there is an issue thinking about those in the way that water is managed within this area, but also there are two significant designated estuaries, the Orwell and the Stour estuaries, are designated as protected sites, and the catchments for both of those and part of the estuaries sit within these Mid-Suffolk and Babergh areas, and also similarly very important estuary, the Deben, is outside of these local authorities, but the very top of its catchment sits within your area as well. And for those protected sites, there are many pressures on them: coastal squeeze related to climate change, which is when sea levels rise and then the fringes of the habitat have got nowhere to go up against the flood walls and flood defences. But also nutrient issues are becoming more apparent there, and as been said before, nutrient issues on these sites is, yes, it's phosphates, but it's also very heavily driven particularly by nitrates, which the main sources of that are agriculture, land use, runoff, and how water is managed within the wider catchment as well. Now, within the 25-year environment plan, there is a target for 75% of all these protected sites to be in what we call favourable condition by 2042. And then with some interim targets that have been put in place in the Environment Improvement Plan, that by 2028 we need to have up-to-date condition assessments and mechanisms in place to address the issues that these protected sites are facing. And that point about up-to-date condition assessments is quite important, because some of our records and data for these sites are quite out of date, but there is a big programme going on to work through all the protected sites in our area and get an up-to-date understanding of the condition of them all, and like I said, then identify the features, identify the mechanisms by which we can improve the condition of those sites. And some of those mechanisms, which I'll touch on now very quickly, like have been said, Natural England work with water companies like Anglian Water, and then in conjunction with the Environment Agency to feed into the environment programme that we've mentioned. Natural England advise the Environment Agency on the river basin management plans, which have already been mentioned. And also we advise the Environment Agency on consultations for permits and plans which potentially could affect protected sites. Then addressing some of these wider issues, we've got various sort of tools that Natural England use for that. There is catchment sensitive farming, which is advisors go out, and colleagues of mine go out and advise farmers on good practice, support agri-environment applications to address water issues, and that can be from managing runoff from yards and buildings to fields and buffers and soil quality, and soil structure, soil management to improve water in ways that will improve water quality. Then more widely, agri-environment schemes. There's a lot of agri-environment schemes in your area. A lot of those are being delivered for the wider environment. Also, there's a lot of options and actions within those agreements to address water quality issues, particularly things like runoff, and so there's buffer strips around field edges and alongside sort of rivers and things like this to avoid sort of sediment and nutrients, or reduce the sediment and nutrients that does enter the waterways that ultimately feed into the protected sites, but also the wider environment. And then I'll just finish off by just sort of touching on the developing plans under local nature recovery strategies, and colleagues of mine are working with the Suffolk County Councils and Norfolk County Council to develop their local nature recovery strategies, and I understand that the county councils are very keen for district authorities who, like Natural England, within the local nature recovery strategy sort of legislation, are what's called supporting authorities. So you have a sort of a role within the legislation, similarly to Natural England, to advise on those local nature recovery strategies and the actions and the mechanisms that can be put in place through those, which, yeah, I think we hopefully would be very well aligned within the room as a whole to sort of start looking at taking actions to improve water quality, buffer strips, enhancing river corridors, better flood management, natural flood management, nature-based solutions where possible. So yeah. And then finally, just sort of touch on, also advise on sort of planning applications and local plans, and colleagues of mine at the moment have been advising on your local plan and providing some specific sort of advice to consider water quality and water supply, as well as other environmental issues within that. So yeah, I think I'll sort of pause there, but we've got a range of tools that we use, and I think along with everybody, we recognise there is a real priority for the environment in this area. We need to do more. There are still lots of issues to be addressed, but we're very much in the space of endeavouring to address those environmental issues that we face. And again, just one final point, I think throughout most of Natural England's plans and policies, in partnership is a key theme, so which has already been mentioned before. So that's because we can't, do it all on our own in a silo as a regulator. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Can I now invite John to speak on behalf of the River Stour Trust? Thank you, John.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me. My name is John Kemp, and I represent the River Stour Trust, which is making a joint application together with Sudbury Town Council for bathing water status for that stretch of the River Stour between the Granary Cut and Cornard Lock. That is a distance of about 3/4 of a mile, and importantly includes Friars Meadow, which is one of the main recreational areas of Sudbury. That is a widely used stretch of river, used by swimmers, canoes, rowers, paddleboarders, and of course the River Stour Trust's own electric passenger launches. We are now at a very advanced stage in this application, which has to be with DEFRA during October. Success would compel the Environment Agency to test the water every week during the bathing season. That's from mid-May to the end of September, publish the results. This, of course, will also put some pressure on anyone who might be polluting the water to stop doing so. There are very few of these designated bathing areas on proper rivers. There are several hundred at seaside towns and in estuaries. You can count the number of proper rivers on the fingers of one hand. We intend to be one of them. Although DEFRA unhelpfully changed the rules halfway through the season, we have been able to match their requirements in terms of numbers of swimmers and local facilities, and we have undertaken an extensive range of consultations. So our application is supported by all the main river users, the Rowing Club, which has an international reputation, the Scouts, the Canoe Club, the Anglers, and importantly, the Common Lands Charity, which manages much of the land bordering and above this section of the river. We are also very pleased to have the full support of Anglian Water, who have been very helpful and very encouraging. We have also undertaken an extensive consultation with the public via public meetings and a consultation stroke petition form, which has now been completed by at least 1,600 people. Now we come to my main reason for speaking to you today, Madam Chairman. There is one thing we are short of, and it's something I hope that this meeting will remedy, and that is the support of Babergh District Council, who of course own Friars Meadow. I did write to your council back in January this year, and I received a reply from your chief executive which went thus: in principle, Babergh District Council would support the River Stour Trust's application to obtain designated bathing water status. However, we are aware that improving water quality in rivers is a complicated issue in which there are already several stakeholders and groups we are actively involved with. I think you will agree that is not quite the wholehearted support that I'm looking for. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, John. That was, we could feel the emotion in that, and thank you very much for that contribution. We now come to members asking questions. We've heard a lot of information, and I know the committee are all anxious to ask their questions. And so, as a change, because it is such a important subject to members, we're going to go with a more orderly way of questions, and I'm going to go from councillor to councillor because everybody said they had questions to ask. Councillor Matheson, can I start with you? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I feel spoilt for choice where to begin, really. Well, perhaps if I could ask about the storm spills. What I think is striking and not acceptable to the public really is that there are still so many of these spills, but we're the driest region in the country, and so if these spills are supposed to only occur after heavy rain, We don't have that much heavy rain. Occasionally we do, but not that often. I just wonder, can you actually tell us whether, as I read nationally, is happening sometimes, where there are storm spills when we haven't had any rain at all for the last 48 hours? You know, I mean, how can that actually happen?
So one of the biggest challenges that we're finding with our EDM programme is the fact that we get external factors that can influence when they activate, and these can be caused by fats getting into the sewer or blockages, and they give an artificially high level. And part of the challenges we're facing at the moment is a lot of the activations that are reported in the papers are not true spill events. We do provide information to journalists when they ask for the information, and we actually do provide them with supporting information to state actually that we're having problems with it because of interference from external factors. So we're finding about a third of the activations are false spill events. So that is influencing our data set, but we are focused on driving improvements to make sure that those don't occur. Anything that's happening outside of a rainfall event is not a storm overflow, and we have a requirement to report that to the Environment Agency as a pollution, and that we do follow those procedures. I know there's a lot of data out there at the moment that looks like there's a lot of storm spills happening in dry weather. Anything that happens in dry weather is reported to the Environment Agency, and there are very low numbers of that happening. But we do know we've got a data accuracy issue that we're focused on improving as well. We're working very closely with the EA. We do share some of the challenges we face, but I think one of the things that would really help us to improve this situation is reducing the amount of rubbish that people flush down their sewer systems, because actually it does cause us a huge amount of problem with data accuracy on storm spills.
Councillor Matheson, do you have another question? So, okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think my question's for Mr. Tufts, the Regional Engagement Officer, but I may be wrong. It comes from work on a planning committee, really. Some time ago, we actually called on a Grampian motion for a chicken farm, which had to, in order to receive planning permission, had to show that it had the capacity to harvest sufficient rainwater to deal with its needs. So it put no stress on the existing water services, which it subsequently has. Which I think was a reasonable decision on the part of the planning committee. Again, I think it's part of the reason why you're here today. We had another planning committee meeting which dealt with 2 developments of about 250 houses in Stowmarket. The first one was for detailed planning permission, which already had outline planning permission, and Anglia Water responded that they had sufficient capacity to deal with the outflows from this development. The second request for planning was for request for outline planning permission, and Anglia Water said they had insufficient capacity to deal with the sewage. Now that put the planning committee, in my opinion, in a very difficult situation. We could not refuse planning permission because Anglia Water had insufficient capacity, and my understanding, neither do you have the ability to refuse to connect to that development. 250 houses produces about 37.5 million litre of water. which what goes in must come out. Now, my question, I think it's more of a request really. Are you able and will you give our planning officers sufficient detail when we are deciding these planning decisions in order to bring out into the open, in the interest of transparency, the costs and consequences of these developments in terms of dealing with the water? We get a response from Anglia Waters, we get Suffolk Highways, we get responses from health and education, but we need that information so that we are aware and the public is aware of the consequences of those developments on our water supplies and our discharges. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. You've obviously, I touched on it earlier, but you raised a really important point about our role in planning. And as you understand, we're not statutory consultees for planning applications, so by law we can't comment necessarily on with enough force to stop a development proceeding. It's up to the local planning authority to implement conditions if we think there needs to be conditions to a development, but there is this automatic right to connect, as you said. So as I said, we've lobbied for that, and that is a change in the law that hopefully will come about through the Plan for Water, which has been submitted to DEFRA this year. With regard to those particular cases, I also don't know those in detail, but our planning team in Anglian Water do scrutinise developments of that size. We literally trawl through planning portals and trying to find them and engage with the local planning authority and developers to ensure that what is being proposed isn't going to add detriment to the environment. In terms of supplying water, again, we've got a statutory obligation to supply fresh water to domestic properties, but not to businesses. To pick up your first point about the chicken farm, which I think quite a lot of media coverage. So we have to focus a lot on supplying water for domestic use above that for industry and business, which again is an anomaly in the regulations. But that's what it is. But we do again work with those businesses and those industries to try and find ways to save water, become more efficient or self-sufficient in terms of winter storage, that sort of thing. Because as I said, we want to develop and grow the region as much as anybody else does, but in a sustainable way. So, but back to your particular point about adding comments and conditions, and our teams do that. But ultimately, the information we provide could only be applicable to that particular development. And what we're not unable to do in the law is to talk about things that are existing issues that developer hasn't got a part to play in. So all we can do is comment on that particular development proposal. If there are existing flooding issues or other issues, that can't be part of that consultation feedback, or not that part of that feedback we give to the planning authority. So it's up to the planning authority to bring all that information together to make a decision and accept or not the conditions that we think you might need to put on. So it's a complicated subject, but hopefully it will become clearer as we become statutory consultees, where we'll have much more say in these things.
Thank you. I think that's it. I think my request is for more information, basically. So, are we going to get that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think our teams will provide the information that they can. I'm trying not to say sort of where we're not allowed to talk about existing issues in a catchment or a development location. If there are already concerns over water quality or flood risk, then the developer hasn't got no obligation to fix any of those if they are proceeding with their own development. But we would comment on individual applications and what that would mean for that catchment. Would it make it worse? Would it make it better? That sort of thing. So yeah, our teams would do that. So we can follow up later if we need to on that particular development. I can talk to our pre-development team and get some information if we need more. Yeah.
It would be useful. Thank you.
Chair, would it be all right if I just said a word? Yes, thank you. Just from the Environment Agency, I just wanted to really make a point. I think your point's very good. The pressure of development and growth, both on the ability to treat, so the capacity of sewage works with the increasing development is a challenge. So we put on standards on permits and the water company will increasingly find it difficult to meet those standards as the pressure on the sewage works increases through development, and they are obliged, if those houses are there, they have to connect them. So we are getting to a point, and I think you're quite astutely bringing that out, where the capacity and the scale of growth. The other point you also raised around the chicken farm is that we're also at a point where our availability to abstract water from the environment is now very limited, and we've got challenges and issues across East Anglia where because we also regulate the abstraction of water. So Essex and Suffolk Water provide drinking water in much of mid-Suffolk. So we would regulate their abstractions to protect the environment, whether that's groundwaters or rivers, and we have sort of minimum flows that the environment would need. And we're at the point already where, you know, we're having to work really hard with the water companies to balance the needs for fresh water to industry and people, to the environment. And we've got some difficult conversations currently happening around Cambridge just on that matter, and we've got some challenges that I'm sure Natural England could talk about around wetland habitats in Norfolk and impacting, actually having to cause reductions to abstraction volumes that are currently in place to protect environment. So I think your comments are very well placed, and I think you know, that planning challenge is quite significant because we need the housing, we need the growth, but the environment in this part of the world, is already on a fine line. So just wanted to say thank you for those comments.
Not for the minute.
I'm very aware of our two other agencies that are on teams. Can we just ask them if they want to? Nicholas and John, do you want to make any comments on those questions?
Nothing from me, Madam Chairman.
Nicholas?
Nothing from me at this point, thanks. But if you want to take up Alison's point around sort of the more details of the abstraction issues for the environment, I can do, but I would imagine this is probably not quite the right forum for going into the detail of that. But I'm happy to have a conversation if need be at a later date.
I don't want you to feel excluded from the meeting.
Oh, it's come on now. It's come on now. Okay. Really, a question for Alison in the Environment Agency. You mentioned concentrations of pollutants and also plant growth. And I live in Bramford by the River Gipping. And sort of on my normal walk, I appreciate that plants grow a lot more in the summertime, but it is really sort of chock-a-block with plant growth at the moment. So much so you sort of wonder, can moorhens, the coots, etc., can they actually get through? And there was somebody the other day on a a paddleboard, and I was just thinking it's clear here, but what would it be like a bit further on? So is there actually a sort of programme for clearing that plant growth?
Okay, I can respond, sorry. So for flood purposes, for flood prevention purposes, we do undertake some levels of weed cutting through our flood sort of functions. However, we only do that where we can see there's a genuine benefit to property or business that weed cutting may assist. One of the challenges we have in our rivers is flow. So with drier, hotter summers, our river flows are decreasing. I talked about the phosphates. So in a river, we've got too much coming in terms of nutrients and phosphates, and the plants love it. So one of the challenges we have is we have warm water, slow flowing, lots of nutrient, and the plants are very happy. So our rivers, a lot of our rivers, are increasingly becoming quite choked with plant growth, and it is not something that we are funded to go in and do, but what we will do, and we are doing, is we work with Natural England, we have farm inspections, we advise farmers about how they might manage their land. The water companies have permits that bring in phosphate reduction, and I think you've got probably about 10 or 11 schemes currently for phosphate reduction across the patch, and some of those will be on the Gipping. So all of those actions are to actually get to the root cause of why we've got those plants there in the first place. We will take some mitigation if we feel that dissolved oxygen, because heavy plant growth, when it's very hot, as Ben knows, he spends many an hour responding to fish. The fish will start to struggle because the plants, obviously, is it at night when you get the oxygen levels depleted. So we do get involved, and it does cause impacts through reduction of oxygen, which then impacts on the fish, and we will get involved then, whether that's aerating a river. Sometimes we'll open up a sluice if we think that might just help with a little bit of flow to do that. But much of that is mitigation, and we need to get to that root cause, that we're not putting the wrong things down. You know, we're not.
So can you investigate what's happening to the fish then?
But only that we know that it's dissolved oxygen caused by the plant growth.
Yes.
Yes. And so what we have to do is prevent the plant growth by getting back to that nutrient inputs. So we put Anglian Water investing through the programme where we've said we would want to see phosphate reduction. That is happening. Don't know whether you've got them all in place yet, but it's happening at the moment through the current asset planning process, and we're working with landowners to reduce that nutrient input. And we manage the abstractions from the river within our regulatory ability to make sure there is flow down the river.
Okay. I just wanted to say something else about bathing water status. I mean, it's I think admirable that Sudbury are working on this, but there are lots of other small areas of the rivers where people do bathe, and I suppose that they don't stand any chance of getting bathing water status because it's not on a large enough scale. But I am sort of concerned, and there's an area in Bramford where people, you know, in warm weather, they regularly jump off the bridge, they regularly bathe. There's somewhere else in Blakenham, and heard recently of somewhere near Scrutiny where there were concerns about pollution in the river, and you wonder how much of that has sort of come further down.
Yes, so our regulations are primarily focused at protecting the environment.
Yes.
And when you're talking about bathing water, I'm assuming you're more concerned with pathogens, things that will give people. Yeah. So bathing water designation and the rules around what makes a bathing water sits with the Secretary of State and DEFRA. When they are designated, obviously we'll go in and monitor those. Rivers are really challenging. It was challenging enough at the sea, and I'll leave the water company to talk about investment, but in salt water, in sunlight, you've got large dilutions, lots of sun, quite a hostile environment, and those pathogens naturally decay, but there's been vast investments in ultraviolet treatment on there at the end of pipe to improve bathing waters around the coast. When you get to a river, it's not just the sewage, it is the land runoff. If you go through a park, it can even be dog muck that can cause a challenge. So in a catchment, you have a much more complex series of inputs. You don't have the same level of dilution. You don't have that same hostile saltwater environment. So I think improving for, in terms of human health and pathogens, the river is not something the regulations currently look at. And I think that the complexity of the river catchment will involve a lot of people, including yourselves, in terms of planning, misconnections, land use, coming together to bring about those improvements. They will be particularly challenging. And being designated doesn't necessarily mean it's not connected to the quality. But what the designation will do is help focus the ability for the water companies to drive investment, but also perhaps target work that's carried out in those catchments to try and improve it. So any bathing water on any river will start to bring some improvements for the catchment.
Okay, I've just got one more comment about the catchment sensitive farming, and it's very good that all these different agencies are working together to improve farming practices. But just a quick suggestion, I think it would be for us councillors going out, and there might be, particularly in Mid-Suffolk, there are quite a lot of farmers we come into contact. I would really like to have a little training session on that, just to learn a few basics about it to be able to discuss with farmers when we meet them.
That would be naturally for catch-sensitive farming, but I'm happy to just respond on yes, that educational piece. We do work with the Rivers Trust, and there are partnerships looking at working with farmers, so I'm sure there'll be links there in terms of helping you understand the actions and the advice and guidance.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
If I may just add to that, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, sorry. Yes, if you would like to get in touch with me after this meeting, with sort of what you'd like to see, we can certainly I can talk to catchment sensitive farming colleagues and we can come up with a plan of something that would be useful for you. But yeah, very much welcome that sort of getting the message out there through all means, and a nice consistent message is really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank
Can
you,
I just
Nicholas.
Can I just add to
Please.
that? So Alison just mentioned about phosphorus schemes. So to reduce phosphorus into the catchments, we do currently have phosphorus schemes that are going to be delivered by 2025. So we have one at Hadley, which is reducing the phosphorus standard to 1 milligram per litre. We've also got one at Norton and one at Elmswell as well. So there are 3 schemes there. There's one at Debenham as well. So we've got 4 schemes in total that need to be delivered by 2025. So that will reduce the phosphorus going into the watercourse and prevents that plant growth from happening.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marriott. Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It may be that you've just answered my question, actually. I'm a member for Hadley South, and a lot of the year in Hadley, and it happens every year, perhaps won't in the future, we have green covering the whole of the river. And it seems to me, but just from a resident observing, that we seem to have less wildlife in and around the river. Perhaps that's not correct, but that's what it appears to be. Can you comment on that, or have you already answered that with your answer just now?
Yes, so I can talk about it from an Anglian water perspective. So yes, one of the schemes that we are delivering is the phosphorus scheme at Hadley Water Recycling Centre. So that will be discharging into that local area. I don't have my map with me, so I'm not sure what's upstream of the river and whether we've got further schemes. It's possible, but I can take that away as an action and find out.
Thank you.
But at Hadley, yes, we are, the phosphorus standard for the discharge to the environment there, it's being tightened to 1 milligram per litre, and that is to improve the good ecological status of the watercourse. It will be, higher phosphorus levels will be encouraging that plant growth to happen. So this tighter standard.
That plant growth, is it?
Apologies, I'm speaking over you then, that was very rude. Yeah, it's called lemna, it's duckweed, I think is what you're thinking about, tiny little platelet leaves, yeah. That has been increasingly over the last few hot, dry summers, because we've had very little rainfall for about 3 years now, very abnormal. And we've noticed that a lot of our rivers, and it's primarily also driven by sort of the slower flows with those hot, dry summers. If you think of our rivers, they were very artificially created with mills. They're beautiful. We've got some amazing heritage and history. But what it fundamentally is doing to our rivers, which naturally would be really small, is making a series of ponded, and lemna is primarily a pond or a lake type plant. It likes slow flows. It will love the nutrients. Yes, you're right, it does have that sort of smothering, and we do get very concerned about it, and sometimes we'll bring an aerator in to break that up. We do on some rivers keep an eye on that dissolved oxygen. So the important bit for us is that we get any reports from members of the public if they see fish in distress or anything associated with those sort of lemna covers, because we will respond and take a look.
It's yourselves that we as a town should get.
We won't come and remove the lemna, but if you see fish that are struggling because of the dissolved oxygen, then we would come and respond to support that.
So what we do at the very bottom of the stour, the last couple of years, we've been putting a device in which constantly measures the dissolved oxygen, sends it back to a website, so we can track on a graph what the dissolved oxygen levels are doing. And when they drop down to sort of less than 20%, we would then open the sluice gate if we can to flush that lemna out from the bottom, because that ends up with a pool of effectively stagnant water. We've had some pretty serious fish kills in the last few years. So by putting these monitors in every summer, we keep an eye on it. Before something happens to the fish, we're able to deal with it.
And I think, to me, this is very reflective of, I think your colleagues, Councillor said, we're in a very dry part of the world. We are an exceptionally dry part of the world with high demands on the limited water we've got. And I think we're just starting to really feel that with our rivers now, in that we manage the abstraction and we're doing everything we can to make sure we're protecting the environment, but we're just hitting, I think, some of those tension points now in terms of what's available for growth and people and what's needed for the environment. And I think we're going to have difficult conversations coming.
Thank you.
That's it for now. Yeah, absolutely. Councillor Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got two very simple questions, actually. The first one is the easy one, of course. Your slide said you have a budget of £811 million for 20 to 2025. How much of that budget have we spent so far?
Good question. I don't know, to be honest.
Easy one. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got about another 120 odd million next year to spend, but we'll find out. We can find out for you. I don't know the details, but we'll find out.
Can we find out, and can you feed it in so it's emailed to all the members? Because fine words here, but no parsnips. Now then, this is lovely. Of course, looking at this wonderful map, which is on page 3 or page 15, I look at the flows into Pinewood and Scrutiny and the flows everywhere else, and there's an awful lot of poor statuses, and there's an awful lot of moderate statuses, so there's very little that's good. And so the question is, when can my parish, my ward, expect us to go from poor to moderate to good?
So the regulations put a deadline of 2027. I think that is dependent on investment by many people. It's, that is something we all have to contribute in terms of a partnership. The reasons, there's some things that already are good, and there's some things that are already in good condition. So some of the invertebrates, like the small bugs that we measure, with the water regulations, Water Framework Directive, it's like there's a number of things that are monitored, and if any one of those is not good, we say the whole stretch isn't good. So it's like one out, all out. So it doesn't mean everything's wrong with the river, but it can mean certain things. The main reasons that we're very orange and yellow is phosphate, which we've had quite a lot of conversation around, and we talked about the actions and the investment. Phosphate is quite pernicious. It doesn't go anywhere. It's a mineral that it'll attach to sediment. So it just keeps cycling through the environment. So we're looking at the water company to strip it out when it goes to the sewage works, but we also need to look at what's put on the land by farming, because it's a fertiliser that they use. So there's a lot of advice and guidance to farmers to manage what they're putting on the land. But it's also in the things we eat, it's in the things we're flushing down the toilets, so looking at the products. And there's been reductions in the phosphate concentration on some of the products we buy. If you look at your detergents, they're often full of phosphate. But over time, if you look back to the 80s to where we are now, the phosphate levels have closed. So but the phosphate doesn't go anywhere. It will stick to the sediment and it will slowly. So even if we cut everything off now, the phosphate will still be attached to the river sediment, and when you get flows, it will get resuspended. And it takes a long time for phosphate levels to drop. So I don't fully expect phosphate to be under control by 2027. I'm just being really honest with you. The other drivers that are making these amber and yellow is dissolved oxygen, which we've said is linked to river flow and linked to plants, because plants cycle through carbon dioxide and oxygen. And then you've also got the fact that there is a lot of plants which are being driven by the nutrients going in. So they're the things, if you heard when we're talking, we're focusing on, working with partners, working with other land use, working with industry to try and minimise that nutrient input, to drive a change in colour.
So is that a case of not this year, not next year, but sometime, and possibly never?
So it's a case of we're doing everything we can with the resources and the money and the investment that government is putting into it to drive those changes. Yeah. But phosphate is a challenge.
We've just employed, around a dozen agricultural regulation officers, so it's not just the water companies that we're working with, we're also working with the landowners. So these officers they're currently working on they will work on a risk-based approach. They look at the sensitive sites, and the agriculture and the landowners that feed into those catchments are working those catchments, and they're going around each of those farms on regulatory visits. And then as they've covered that work, they will then start to stretch out into the other parts of Suffolk.
And that was additional funding from government because it comes from the taxpayers' money, farm advice and farm inspection. So we got that through the last spending review to deliver that additional work and focus.
That's it, Councillor.
Well, that's it. Thank you, Madam Chairman. You know, what can one say? Running for Father Christmas.
Could I just add to that, sorry, very quickly? I guess one of the things that we realise as the water industry is that in the past, I think all the sectors were very focused on delivering what they had to deliver in isolation, and we realise now that we can't do that. We have to work in partnership with highways, with farmers, to actually deliver this together, because on the one hand we want to build houses and we want growth to happen in the region, but we only have technically achievable limits from the technology that's out there to achieve certain standards of what we're able to treat to. So we realise now that it's really, really important for us to work together to get to this good standard, because if we try and do it on our own, we are just not going to get there.
Councillor Carter, your question.
Thank you. And thank you for that presentation. By the time I'd written down the question from the first slide, I'd forgotten what was coming up in the second one. Where to start? Following on from Councillor Matson's question, regards the false positives in dry weather. If there's false positives in dry weather through outside influence, what guarantee do we have that there isn't outside influence, but it means that an actual overflow event in wet weather isn't being recorded?
That's a very good question, and we've actually been really conservative about how we've set up these devices. So when we first started to install them, we were very nervous about missing any storm overflow spills. So we did set them up very conservatively, which is probably why we've ended up over-reporting in a number of cases. However, there is always that risk that we may miss an overflow event during a wet weather discharge or when it shouldn't be happening. And we are working to try and make sure that that doesn't happen. We are using a verification process now that doesn't just look at one device anymore. It actually looks at multiple pieces of information in the network. And as I said, we're starting to employ artificial intelligence and more data intelligence systems to tell us whether our devices are telling us exactly whether they're spilling or not. So we've been working with a company called Storm Harvester and others to try and develop systems so that we don't miss anything at all. But we are in a period of learning, and we do know that we're in a situation where although we've set them up conservatively, there is some way to go with regards to improving our accuracy of monitoring. But as I say, we've got lots of verification systems out there, so we're not just using one piece of information. We're using rainfall, we're using borehole levels, we're using river levels, and we're using multiple devices to tell us, yes, this device is operating as expected or not.
Thank you. Linked to that question, this is going to the Environment Agency. When you get a record of this overflow event, I know you're very means tested, depends on how means reliant you are. What happens with regards to, do you do a full test in the rivers afterwards, or the quality tests? What happens afterwards?
So that is based on the information that we receive from Anglian Water. If it sounds very serious, we send one of our officers out who will go out and take downstream samples, gather any evidence that we would need to take an investigation forward. We obviously have a lot of experience of these overflows, and so if we think it's been a short duration and hasn't particularly had an impact on the watercourse, like you say, we're risk-based, so we wouldn't necessarily send an officer out each time for that. So if it's severe, an officer would go out and take that investigation forward, and if we find out it's had a great environmental impact, then we possibly take a case forward on that basis.
Could there still be, if there's a small event, could there still be a high concentration of a harmful chemical or substance within the event that might not be recorded, might not be recognised until later?
So usually we would know of an event from either Anglian Water, and I know you would send people out. If also we would look, because if there's things that aren't sewage, like in terms of there are other chemicals, then usually they might be impacting on, say, the invertebrates. We would send a biologist out if we were getting reports of anything that wasn't looking well or was dying in the river. Absolutely would go out. That would add to it being serious. So if there's any reports of the little bugs starting to die, we would take that more seriously. So
I'm assuming I'm taking up a lot of time. Just very quickly answer. I do have some more, but I'll move on.
Councillor Carter, ask the next question. We'll go to the end and then we can go back again and see if there are any more questions.
It's just a question in regards with the additional plants life, with the already recorded lower invertebrates and things like that invisible. How visible is it going to be for things dying off if you can't see things in the rivers with the weeds?
So if we get reports of people seeing things floating, and often there's minor ones, is because we know they're going into a dry ditch. If we felt there was something that had been flowing for a while, going into a river, then we would send someone out. That's where we would determine it was more significant. Quite a lot of Anglian Water discharges may be into a dry headwater or dry ditch. So therefore the ability for it to travel is limited, the ability to have any impact is limited, and that's when Ben says we would know that that's what was going on. In terms of fish and smaller things, yeah, people should report them in to us through our instant hotline. And also, you know, if we had a significant enough discharge with a volume or a duration, then we'd send someone out to look for those things, and they would look to see. They wouldn't, you know, we would go looking. And we have ecologists that would then go out and do that to provide any evidence as part of the investigation. And that's part of our evidence, because obviously, like with anything else with enforcement and sanctions, we have to prove beyond all reasonable doubt. So we have expert people that would go out and do that monitoring as part of our case.
And one thing that is harmful is ammonia, and you can't see ammonia, but we have handheld kits, so we can test the ammonia levels of the discharge. So you can't see that, but we know that that's particularly harmful, so we will test for that to make sure there's no elevated levels of ammonia being discharged into the river or upstream and downstream of our discharge.
And that data is all shared with the Environment Agency straight away. So yeah.
Thank you. I'll be good now.
Councillor Carruthers.
Yes, hello. Firstly, I'd just like to say I'm really pleased to hear about the efforts to reduce the amount of phosphates going into water, because regarding the plant life, to have it all cut down, I'd be worried about danger of, killing nesting birds and other animals. And I'm also the other member for Hadley South, so we're very well represented. And the amounts of lemna in the river, I was part of a community group who were clearing that out last year, and it was a really smelly, awful job. But so pleased to hear about that. And we're going to do it again probably this year. So my question is that in April this year, the government said that they were going to ban wet wipes next year, in 2024. Are there really any wipes that are okay to flush, like non-plastic wipes? And how can the public be educated not to put rubbish down the toilet?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I mean, as I said before, wet wipes are the bane of our lives, really, in Anglian Water and other water companies. Now, the government haven't said they're going to ban them. They're going to said they're open a consultation to ban the plastic in wet wipes. So wet wipes themselves, I think there's a place for wet wipes, absolutely. There's the right sort of wet wipes. People in modern families, care system, they rely on wet wipes very much, but as long as they're dealt with properly. It's a similar campaign that Water UK, which is the industry body, have announced as well, called Bin the Wipe rather than Ban the Wipe. So I think there is a place for wet wipes. There is a fine to flush label on some wet wipe product that are produced. I think the jury's out on how fine to flush they really are. But we would rather bin the wipe than ban the wipe. So, but certainly getting plastics out of them completely is the consultation that's part of the plan for water that's been put forward. So, in terms of communication, Anglian Water have a scheme, a campaign called Keep It Clear. So again, if you Google, I can send you a link around, but Keep It Clear is our sort of partnership campaign to remove what we call unflushables. So not just the wet wipes, but the fat, oils and grease that combine with the wet wipes and cause those things the fatbergs you've heard about, I'm sure, over the years, that block sewers and cause pollutions and spills. So we do a lot of work with food establishments through a company called ECAS, that we go around and monitor the fat disposals and oil disposal of those companies and advise on how best to use fat traps and capture those fats. And you can even recycle that oil and sell it on as a product. I know we're looking at, people can use it as biofuel and all sorts. So there's a market there that's growing all the time. But ultimately, it's the education, as you said, is right. And so we've got a school program as well. Get the generation coming forward to understand about the impacts of those wet wipes and that unflushable material, and get them to, nag their parents and hopefully change some behaviours that way. But it is a problem. It's costing us millions of pounds a year to clear blockages. And, we are pushing as hard as we can. So we, again, I think as Tash said earlier, we would really welcome support of local authorities to help us share that message. I'm sure we can work together to get that message out. And there's been some really successful local schemes and initiatives that have, especially with kids, they love the gunk and the horrible smells and that sort of thing. So showing them and putting a wet wipe in a bottle and a bit of toilet roll and shaking it up and showing you the difference is quite impressive. So yeah, happily to work together on the council on that.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Sorry, I got it wrong about the wet wipes. I had realised that it was the plastic. I was just a bit anxious. Is there any strategy for tackling microplastic pollution? I mean, is that possible? I mean, it's so tiny, isn't it? I mean, what on earth can be done about that?
I think there is mentions of plastics within the plan for water, but obviously at the moment that's still to go through both houses of Parliament, so we're not totally sure what ultimately that be, but a lot of it is about banning the product rather than actually being able to do much to remove what's there. So obviously, we've all got a part to play in terms of the products we choose, how choosing not to litter, managing litter, because it's the erosion of those that then leads to your microplastics. But I think there's going to be more focus on certain products and chemicals being banned through that plan for water. But until that's regulation, then those actions aren't taken. But as we go along, there are things that increasingly are being banned, and that focus on plastic needs to be maintained. But removing them, it's like some of the other things. Yeah. The best thing, it's a bit like the phosphate. We need to get back to not putting so much on the land, only putting what we need, thinking about the phosphate content of other products that we might be putting down the toilet.
Our existing process, does take out as much plastic as we can. I was going to offer it at the end of the meeting, but if any of you would like to come and see one of our water recycling centres, we'll happily show you around and show you what we do and how we work with removing plastics. And we have skips full of the stuff that we have to take off to landfill. And our meshes that filter that incoming effluent are getting tighter and tighter to remove as much microplastics as we can, but ultimately the smaller bits do get through, and they end up possibly in the sludge treatment process and then maybe back onto land. So as Alison says, there's no regulations around that yet, but again, we're working together to try and get to that point, but really the answer is not getting it in the environment in the first place. So your choices about what you buy and how products you use really are the way to remove plastics.
Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Which one?
Oh, no.
Thank you. Thank you. Morning. I'm very pleased to see that there's a lot more public data available to the public. I noticed that, and I'm really excited to hear about your real-time reporting map that's coming up. You mentioned the phosphorus schemes, but you didn't mention Sudbury. I represent Sudbury Ward. I saw on the website that Sudbury Water Recycling Centre was due to have phosphorus removal equipment installed this year. Could you confirm whether that has happened?
Sorry, yes. Sorry, there is one due at Sudbury. I have missed some of my list. Apologies. There's a Sudbury phosphorus scheme which is due to be implemented by December 2024.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't read them all out. I was just trying to scroll through my list, and I can actually share that full list for the whole region.
No, that's fine. I only asked because on the website it said it was due to finish by this summer. It's obviously been set back. So I was going to ask about that specifically anyway. But
I can actually check when it's finished, because I think what we get in our water industry programme is an obligation date, but we may just try and deliver it before that obligation date, so it's possible that it's finished early, but I can double check that for you.
Okay, thank you. It's good news either way, but the sooner the better. And also in Sudbury, in regards to the bathing status application, I know that Anglian Water are supporting the application, and you've enabled citizen scientists with water monitoring. I belong to another group that monitors the River Stour in Sudbury, and we've been testing for E. coli and found quite high levels in the bathing status area, and I believe Anglian Water has too. I just wondered, what will it mean if hopefully we get the application, we get the status granted? What will that mean on the ground if the E. coli levels are still high when the river is tested?
Yeah, so if the application is successful this autumn, it will go into, I think, as was explained through the RIS Trust, it will go into the monitoring programme. So we then, on behalf of the government, undertake the monitoring. So we'll get that E. coli. There's another indicator, pathogen indicator, that we also look for. And then we are able to report those, and we publish those results as they come out. So you'll just be more informed about the level of E. coli in the river. Then, if that is not within the right sort of standards, so at the end of that year, the government will issue the classification for that bathing water. We can help drive investment by the water companies, the plan for water will drive much of this anyway through the changes to storm overflows, but you have to remember even treated sewage has E. coli in it. So it's not just storm flows, treated sewage. Agriculture, cows, birds, anything warm-blooded is putting those things in. And you also have to remember that E. coli is just an indicator of a whole group of pathogens. So when you look at the bathing water regulations, so when they go out to sea, we monitor E. coli because you cannot detect viruses adequately in the environment. But what the water company are able to do is track a reduction in viral load through their treatment, which is where we can show that UV demonstrates a real improvement to minimising the risk to human health. So it needs an even higher level of treatment if you're going to do that. But it may be in a river catchment. We don't fully know all of those sources. So one of the things we can do in the Environment Agency is if a sample is high during that year, we might be able to then take some of that E. coli and we can look at the DNA of it. It is a one-off snapshot and it's a very expensive piece of analysis, so we don't offer it very routinely. It comes to about £900 to £1,000 to just do the one. But you can get an idea of what might be contributing to the pathogen load, and you get an idea of whether it is just all human or whether there's other ruminants or other things that are contributing. But then, if you want to bring it down, yes, we can drive investment at the sewage works, and as I said, I think the Plan for Water will do quite a lot of that anyway. It'll be about, again, looking at those other sources, so it will be managing dog litter, it could be managing, and I know on some coastal ones, there's been, keeping an eye on the seagulls, don't feeding the seagulls campaign, because actually doing that has improved the quality of the bathing water. And it will also be working with farmers and looking at how and when they're spreading muck on their fields, because obviously if they do that and it rains and there's better farming practices, so cows will be a big source of E. coli, and obviously many of them we try and work with them and how we can prevent access to the rivers. So it's a very complicated picture once you get into a river, but what the status will do is it allows a driver for that to be looked at, and it will allow perhaps a driver for investment.
From a bather's point of view, you said the classification will be
So at the end of the year, there'll be an announcement of what that classification is. From a bathing point of view, there's a SwimFo website, and for every bathing water, every time we take a sample, it's published on there. So you can go in, and as soon as it's available to us, it's on the website, and you can see what those concentrations are like from our analysis. If we are aware of a particularly, so on where we've got some coastal beaches, which is obviously where we've got the most experience, because that's where most of them are, if we know the quality of that bathing water is particularly driven by rainfall events, and it may not be sewage, sometimes it's catchments on a certain beach, we can put out advance warnings to the public through the website, but also the local authority has a responsibility for a bathing water in terms of signing and warning the public. So we'd be working closely with you if we were aware of, if a bathing water was linked to rainfall events, or we were aware of a pollution event in the river, we'd obviously be in touch so that you were able to warn and inform the users of that bathing water. So we'd have a closer working relationship as a result of that bathing water.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I just remind everybody that we can't have lights on. There can only be one light for the microphones on at one time. It does detract from the sound. So if you can just remember when you're not speaking to turn your microphone on. Thank you very much. Councillor Wyman.
Thank you, Chair. Worth waiting for, I hope, my questions. First, I'd like to thank the witnesses of the panel for a great presentation, really detailed, and clearly a very, very complicated and detailed subject, because land use is obviously a major part of the overall conversation in relation to knock-on pollution, etc., into our rivers and sewers. And I do think it's a sort of bit of a shame that DEFRA aren't present today, because they are central to quite a few of the things that we often talk about, which you guys have to link in with, also with the people from Natural England. So, my first question really relates to land use, and I'm really interested to know where we are with things like catchment-sensitive farming, but also particularly, and you mentioned it, Alison, just a few moments ago, E. coli, and how we actually monitor And it's not mainly within this district council area, but certainly within the Suffolk coastal, or whatever it is nowadays, North Suffolk, whatever. The runoff from outside pig farms, because obviously, you know, it's quite a big thing nowadays, extensive pig production on the sort of light lands of the coast. And if I'm completely honest, if you drive by, it would be difficult to understand how it's possible to estimate or calculate what the E. coli and or any other pathogens that are running off from those areas into our systems, particularly into, for example, the Deaver catchment and the like. That's sort of question one. And I'd also like to invite Nick to comment on that from a Natural England perspective.
So yeah, catch sensitive farming, I'll hand over to Nick, but just a quick one. In terms of agriculture, we would be advising farmers on how best to operate their farm, whether that's an intensive pig farm, intensive chicken farm. We want to involve them in what they're doing with the waste from those farms. And I think you're right that, you know, free-range pigs, we get involved with pollution incidents from those. So if there's excessive runoff, we will get involved, because it's not so much the E. coli. It has quite a high oxygen demand on a river if it gets in, because it's very biological. So it hits the river, it will use up a lot of oxygen. So we do give a lot of advice and guidance around intensive farming, and pigs and outdoor pigs I know have been challenging. I think Ben would agree with me, but we work with them on their practice and at their disposal. And if there are incidents, then we would take action.
Alison, sorry, I should put in. Alison, how do you control it though? I mean, there seems to be no way of actually having, you've got no lever that you can apply, like you can with lots of other things where you've got a pollution incident. There seems to be no lever that you can use to actually control that.
Sorry, we have several pieces of legislation that are our levers for bringing those pig farms back into compliance. So the regulatory officers I referred to earlier on, that is their remit. So my team from Norfolk and Suffolk might respond to the pollution incident. So we'd look at the enforcement side and looking to take that case on, and any fines or anything that the courts may hand down. But on the other side, you've got the advice side coming from the regulatory officers, who would then engage with that farmer and say, look, you're not compliant with the NVZ regulations or the farming rules for water. This is where your non-compliances lie. This is what you need to bring your farm back into compliance. So it's probably one of our better served regimes, agriculture, at the moment, in terms of the levers we do have.
Thanks. I was going to mention NVZs. I thought probably NVZs had sort of gone by the wayside years ago, but surely there must be a conversation with government to using the agri-environment schemes to try and help farmers manage this better, by, allowing better buffer strips and, and actually not rewarding them, but incentivising farmers to do that. And sorry, my second question, which sort of relates to this to some extent really, is you mentioned water abstraction and the demands on water abstraction generally. Should we not be looking more closely again at incentivising farmers for things like winter catchment, so we can then try and withdraw some of the abstraction licences that we can withdraw, and at the same time encourage farmers to have more winter catchment, so there aren't the demands on the rivers, such as, the abstraction, say, on the River Stour, which, the gentleman from Sudbury mentioned. There must be better ways of doing it, and certainly encouraging that incentivisation of building and construction.
So there is support for winter storage reservoirs, but obviously they need planning. But there is incentivisation. I think the government's just recently closed a round of people being able to apply for support to build winter storage reservoirs. So that does happen. And we absolutely actively encourage winter storage reservoirs to protect the environment. That is the way to go. And increasingly, if the rain's going to fall in winter, then they should have that to get them through the summer. Some of the crops we grow are very water intensive. So we very much restrict the amount they abstract, and we very much work with the farmers on putting those schemes in. There has been supplemental funding. I was just going to say it might be worth Natural England just speaking a little bit on the other incentives and buffer strips.
Can we hear from Nicholas? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, as I alluded to there, catchment sensitive farming is, we have farming officers, they're advisors, sorry, change of title. Catchment sensitive farming advisors. In your area, it's the whole area is covered now by an advisor, but that whole area is only being covered by an advisor in the last 2 years, because prior to that, there was a prioritisation driven that only included the sort of north end of your areas that feeds into the Waveney catchment. However, now there is a catchment sensitive farming advice across your whole area. With farming, it takes a while to build the relationships and build the trust to get the actions delivered on the ground. So someone in post for 2 years, they're starting to make an impact, but it takes time, and we understand that. The thing with catchment sensitive farming as a standalone piece of work, it's providing advice, but it doesn't provide sort of compulsion, shall we say. Some of that sort of, if we get to the point of something needing compulsion because advice hasn't worked, it then falls into various regulatory regimes, as has already been described by the Environment Agency, or Natural England can take regulatory action with appropriate evidence where it's affecting protected sites. There is also, if we relate to, you're mentioning the coastal and the Deben, catchment sensitive farming advisors are working with the Deben Farm Cluster, which is a partnership with Rivers Trusts and others to, like I say, improve the management for the water environment across the farms within the farm cluster, which is something very much encouraged, because obviously at catchment you really do need to work at scale rather than on an individual farm basis. Agri-environment schemes, countryside stewardship, both the mid-tier and the higher tier have options which farmers can choose to implement to reduce runoff and improve soil structure to reduce runoff, but also put buffer strips in. Cover cropping is another activity that's very much encouraged through those schemes. Again, they are voluntary schemes, but there is compensation for that, or sort of they come with funding. There are conversations can be had as to the relative prioritisation of doing these measures versus other land uses which don't provide that level of environmental protection. But that's always a scheme with any sort of funded scheme. Is it enough? It's taxpayers' money ultimately as well, and the payment rates are set within DEFRA, I believe, and in conjunction with the Rural Payments Agency who run the schemes. But Natural England's advisors advise both on the higher tier schemes, which have a lot of Natural England input in, and our catchment sensitive farming advisors can advise on the mid-tier schemes, which is predominantly put together by individual farmers. But that's why I would sort of go back to the earlier point and very much encouraged by the request for getting some information from the councillor earlier about understanding the types of measures that can go in place to help protect the water environment through these schemes. And sort of the point in my mind on this is there's a sort of a relatively small suite of relatively well-known and understood measures that can be implemented across the board to make a difference. So buffer strips, the wider the better, the more tussocky, for one sort of three-dimensional is a sort of technical phrase, but basically the more tussocky they are, the slower the water moves, the more sediment, and it's particularly the sediment with the phosphate that takes the phosphate into the rivers. that can be addressed. There's also actions within that, move gateways from the sort of bottom corner of a field, so it all rushes out the bottom corner, move gateways higher up, and so the runoff doesn't just charge out through a gateway. So there's quite a lot of, within the scheme, there's quite a lot of practical measures that can be undertaken and that are funded to undertake those measures. But yeah, there's still work to do, and there's more advice that goes out to farmers to do this, and the more encouraged they are, the better overall.
Can I?
Thank you for the response.
Thank you.
Yes, could I just add quickly to that? Yes, so, yeah, well, a couple of points. On abstraction and the challenge that we face in the region, there's a couple of things. Water Resources East is an organisation I'd point you towards, which covers a lot of stuff what Nicholas has said, basically about water resource management in East Anglia, and including farming and other industry and all the water companies, which we're a part of, and a lot of other organisations are part of. The other point on abstraction is that we're bringing more water to the region. So we've got our strategic pipeline, which is coming from Lincolnshire, which you might have heard about, which ends up in Suffolk and Essex, which is going to be the biggest water pipe we've ever built. It should be in commission by 2025. But again, that's bringing more water into East Anglia, and certainly in the south, to combat the abstraction challenges we've got, as Alison mentioned, where we need to protect the environment. So we are doing a lot of that investment too, not on just water recycling, but on fresh water provision as well. So just want to add that in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just add another?
Very quickly.
Apologies. Yes, it was just in the following on from the point of abstractions and winter storage. Yes, we're very much supportive of that and have worked in particular cases with the Environment Agency and water companies to build that. I think there is we need also, there's a value in stepping back even further and looking and relating that to flood issues and capturing that flood water, which is more complicated, but I think is something we do need to be looking towards in the future, and that relates to things like local nature recovery strategies and some of these slightly longer term and broader scale approaches as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question actually, as chair. It's not the very last, but I will put it in here. I come out of a history of healthcare. And when I was looking through the papers, is there any discussion with pharmaceutical companies before they actually produce drugs as to what might be the end result and how that might impact the waterways and the sewage system? Thank you.
I don't think that's either of our specialism, but that may well be happening, and I know we get involved with chemicals through DEFRA and government in terms of, yes, there's a lot of work going on in terms of chemicals, what should be banned, what should be reduced, when should it be used. So I cannot give you specifics on the development of new pharmaceuticals, but pharmaceuticals is an area of growing, I suppose, interest and concern.
Well, it's very complex and needs further investigation, I think, actually. Thank you. I'm very sorry, but Councillor Mellon did have a question, but unfortunately he had to go. And Councillor Matheson, you're going to ask the questions on his behalf, aren't you?
Thank you, Chair. I have got questions for our officers, planning officers particularly, but I've also wanted to propose that as we've been going for 2 hours, that we do have a comfort break, and also that we need a little time to consider some recommendations, and also that, just to go ahead for a moment, that I'd be asking that one of our recommendations would be that we submit some further questions to our external representatives, as it's obviously been very good to have them here, and but there is yet more to there is yet more to ask, I think. So if we could have a comfort break before we tackle that lot.
And no, what I'd like to do, Councillor Matheson, I'd already discussed that with Alicia. If we just finish how many questions have you got?
Well, as a couple on the planning officers particularly, really looking back to the motion that we passed last November, I was wondering, you know, to what extent we've managed to actually implement. Firstly, there's the question of evidence for our future allocations in the joint local plan, which seems to be Mr. Barker's question, and but also to what extent are we managing to get the information, the additional information into our planning reports that go to the committee and the you know, from Anglian Water, and highlighting that aspect in the case officer's reports, which is perhaps for both of you.
I think, actually, I mean, I quite agree with you, Councillor Matheson, we need a break. So apart from those questions, are there any other questions from the committee that... Councillor Carter? Well, I think it would be useful. That does mean, though, that everybody needs to come back, including our guests. Yeah. So I'm sorry about that. Is that okay?
We need to leave quite soon, but it depends how we can get through these things now.
So we've got to make a decision as a committee. Our guests are on limited time. Do we ask them the planning question can be asked afterwards to our
We're more than happy to take written questions afterwards and get back to you. Absolutely, no problem at all with that.
Okay. Are there any questions that need to be addressed to our guests? Because we can't... But we'll have to make them very quick. Okay? Councillor Smith, do you want to go now?
Thank you, Chair. Back to Sudbury, there's an application for an artificial sports pitch at the football club, which has caused a bit of concern. I know Sudbury Town Council have asked for a bit more information about the potential pollution, and I believe Anglian Water are sponsoring that or funding it. Is that a good idea if there is a concern around pollution?
I don't know about that particular. We'll have to look into that. That's the first I've heard of it, so we'll get back to you on that one. No problem.
If you don't know, you don't know. That's fine. Thank you. In your preamble, Grant, you mentioned rainwater and that it needn't go through the sewage system. It could go straight into the subsoil. Would it be too grand a scheme to change our existing drainage to drain into ballast or other?
In short, yes, it'll be replumbing entire houses and all sorts, but certainly new developments aren't built that way anymore, so there should be separate surface water and foul systems in place. We can make use of the planning system. But unfortunately, there's so many existing properties with surface water connections into foul systems that would be impossible to fix all of them. What we do we encourage people to save water, put water butts in, attenuate that flow. Even if it still goes into the foul system, we can slow it down. That helps as well. So having water butts on your house, collect that free rainwater for your garden, will always help as well. So we do encourage people to do that as much.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you. I also have questions from Councillor Mellon. They do overlap with mine. I'm happy for them to be read quickly, or should I just read my own? Because both of them need...
Just are you addressing them to the guests?
Yes, they are.
Okay, then we can come back and address any internal questions.
Certainly, yes. Okay. They are questions to the guests. Right. should I read my own or should I read Councillor there's the question. Right, because I know it's Councillor Mattison was going to ask it. But regards the planning, and we do consult with Anglian Water regarding plan applications, even though we're not a statutory consultee. Other infrastructure providers, being education, health service, ask for contributions when large housing developments are applied for. Why doesn't Anglian Water do the same?
Sorry, what was the question? Why don't Anglian Water?
Our other infrastructure providers, I can't even pronounce the words, get my teeth in eventually, education, health service, etc., ask for contributions when large housing developments go up. Yet yourselves don't. Is there a reason why you don't ask for contributions?
Well, we do ask for contribution from the developer under Section 106, so that part of that payment is paid to Anglian Water into a pot, and then that money's then split to where the most impact can be come from it. So it might not necessarily be in that local vicinity if we don't need any work, but that goes into a fund that is used to add mitigation to encourage and better sort of services we can provide. So there is a fund that comes from developers, yes, collection fund.
What triggers yourselves to invest in new infrastructure when significant housing is built in a catchment of a water treatment works?
So
Yes, so we will look at capacity of the development, and then we will assess that capacity against what load it is bringing into the downstream water recycling centre. If that water recycling centre has got the capacity to treat that load, then we know we don't need to invest. If it doesn't have the capacity to treat that load, then we will invest to put more treatment processes in place on that works to treat it. And then we also look at flow as well. So it might be that we can treat the load but not the volume. So we will look at the volume that's required from that extra development, and then we will invest as required if there's not enough capacity in the network or at the downstream water recycling centre. So that just drives us. So the thing that actually drives us to invest will be whatever the permit is that we have been issued by the Environment Agency. And if we know we're going to discharge more flow into that receiving watercourse, we go back to the Environment Agency and we say we want to now discharge this much flow because of this development that's happening upstream. And then the Environment Agency will issue us a new permit with tighter standards so we don't cause deterioration in that receiving watercourse. And therefore, we invest to treat that additional volume, and we also then invest to treat that load to meet the new permit standard issued by the Environment Agency.
Part of my own question regarding, it's been noted that we've had unusual dry 3 years. And I wonder personally if there's a overlay map between the storms and water in our area and the steady reduction in the water waste. I did wonder, what's been written by Councillor Mellon here is the top overflows in our area in 2022, which was a very dry year, were 658 hours at Ston and Aspel, 568 hours at Thorndon, and 443 hours at Badwell Ash. When will these sorts of figures be reduced?
So those storm overflows operate in response to rainfall events. So if we have more localised rainfall events, then those storm overflows will operate more frequently. Now we are building more storm storage and we're increasing our treatment capacity at our works to reduce those storm spills, so that will help. So if we have the same number of storm events happening this year in comparison to previous years since the storm storage has been built, then those number of events of releases to the environment will overall reduce. But we do have to make sure that we're protecting businesses and homes from flooding, and that's why these storm overflows operate. So there are systems like Meteomatics, there are rain gauges out in our network, so anybody has access to those data sets to be able to see when and how often rainfall occurs. But the biggest thing that we're challenged with at the moment is the climate change, these flash events that are happening that are quite localised in our catchments, and therefore storm overflows are going to operate as and when we get those really heavy short rainfall events happening. But yes, our long-term plan is to reduce harm from storm overflows, increase the storage in our capacities, but also remove this rainfall from our systems so that we don't operate them as much as we do now.
And the final question from Andy Mellon, from Councillor Mellon, which I do absolutely love, because I've been rather bogged down by figures regarding investments and shareholders and dividends. But isn't the truth that Anglian Water has prioritised paying out dividends to shareholders rather than investing in infrastructure?
I can answer that. I mean, categorically no. Our investment model is that shareholders have invested in the company and they haven't actually taken dividend until last year for the previous 5 years. So they've reinvested what shareholders value they would have back into business. They're also investing, putting more money directly into Anglian Water as well, as alongside our money we get from yourselves as bill payers to drive further environmental improvements. So that there is no relation between stakeholders, shareholders and investment at all. So in fact, you can say the opposite. They're investing more rather than taking more out of the business. But yeah, it's all public. It's in our annual report. You can see all the figures this year.
Thank you. I can share the figures, but I have later.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Councillor Matheson, did you have any questions for the guests? No for the guests. But you do have questions for planning officers. Okay. Ladies and committee members, I'm drawing this session to a close for a break. We're still in question time, so we come back and we come back at 12 o'clock. Is that long enough? Does anybody know if that's long enough? Is that okay? Can I, before we go, can I just we need to thank our guests for excellent presentations. I want to thank Grant and Natasha from Anglian Water, Ben and Alison from the Environment Agency, Nicholas from Natural England and John from the River Star Trust. Thank you very much for answering our questions. I'm sorry it's gone on quite a long time, but I knew it was going to be a lengthy question session. But thank you very much.
You're all very welcome. Thank you.
I think there's only your questions, Councillor Matheson, but we'll start with you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I was one of the members who, in the old council, as it were, voted for the motion last November, which gave rise to this hearing we've had today as the first paragraph of the resolution, which is good. So really, I wanted to ask Mr. Barker, as the director, you know, how far and how well we are gathering evidence for the local plan about the cumulative impact of sewage when deciding the overall level of housing and other development, and that the water cycle study updated would be informing the decisions about allocations, which I know is sort of part 2 of the joint local plan now. You know, so are we actively doing that, I think, is my question.
Thank you, Councillor. So to confirm, some evidence gathering to inform part 2 of the joint local plan is underway, but not related to these specific issues. And as soon as we move into part 2 of the plan in earnest, then absolutely we'll get into this and look at the updated water cycle study and work with colleagues, with other stakeholders, including Anglian Water, including Northumbrian Water, including the Environment Agency and Natural England, to ensure that this issue is something that is considered as we're looking at part 2 of the plan, which will include housing allocations.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd assume we were already working on part 2 in effect, and so sometime soon.
As I said, some evidence gathering has already commenced and been commissioned that will inform part 2, but not in respect of this specifically yet, but it will.
If I carry on to my other question, which stems from part 3 and 4 of the motion, which I think was unanimously passed at Mid-Suffolk and certainly got passed at Babergh, but was everybody in favour of it, were they, Chair? I was just wondering that it was unanimously passed at Babergh as well, wasn't it? Yes. Yeah, I can see there's people nodding behind you. Yeah, so the point there really was that we would ask Anglian Water to actually tell us which treatment works would be managing the sewage outfall of any particular application. Obviously, we're talking about major applications here, really, you know, and about their capacity to treat, and you know, and about the level of these overflows that we've been talking about this morning, and you know, and the you know, and yeah, I see it notes that we can only request this, not require it. But nevertheless, are we getting it? And then related to that is the fourth paragraph, which asks that planning officers include this information and you know, discussion of it in their report as a specific section. And I'm not kind of immediately feel as if that's coming in front of us at the planning committee. So if you could give us a bit of reassurance that that's happening.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that, Councillor Matheson. Yes, in short, notwithstanding that we already were consulting Anglian Water on major applications, following the motion of November last year, we amended our consultation request template such that we asked those targeted questions of Anglian Water from then on, And then what we do is, what we get back, we report to members through the committee and decision-taking process. To confirm that, and grateful for the break, I had a look at one of the items that went to committee last month in Thurston for 112 houses, and it was the case there that, yes, we'd sent that consultation request. We received a relatively fulsome response from Anglian Water, and that was reported in full in the committee report for members who ultimately then took a decision.
Good, right, thank you. And I suppose the, are we discussing it in the balance, or can we discuss it in the balance of the material consideration, really would be my supplement.
Well, that's a more difficult one to answer because it really depends upon the circumstances. Generally speaking, if you've consulted Anglian Water, they raise no objection, they have capacity, they're happy that there's a suitable connection that will be made, they offer up suitable planning conditions, then broadly speaking, the assessment of an application will relate solely to the land use involved, and this is 188, Power 188 of the MPPF. You then assume, or you will presume, that statutory regimes, other regimes, will operate efficiently. So that's the point really where development management ends, and then the roles and duties of those other guests that you heard from and questioned this morning will come into play.
Councillor Matheson, is that your last question?
I'm not sure who to, this is just to the council generally. Is there anything more that we as a council can do to change public behaviour around litter, putting rubbish down toilets, and also the need to install water butts to reduce rainwater overwhelming sewers? Because that last point, it was nothing, that hadn't occurred to me. I mean, is there anything that we can do, funding cheap water butts or public information, something on the website?
Councillor Carruthers, that sounds to me like something to be debated as a group, as a committee. So can you hang on to that? Was there another question? Councillor Wyman.
Follow-up question to Stephen, really, from Councillor Matheson's point. Do we get any information from, say, Anglian Water on cumulative impact in communities where there's a gradual growth of housing, so you've gone from sort of 5 to 10 to 20 to 100, etc. Because some small villages don't have massive sort of sewage facilities, and the impact on these would be quite significant. Do we get any follow-up information on cumulative impact from Anglian Water?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of a specific example, but I'm sure that those situations can and do occur, which is why I think, as the representatives from Anglian Water mentioned, they have on occasion sought Section 106 contributions that, assuming they meet the SIL tests, i.e. that they're necessary to make that development acceptable and are directly related to it, then we can secure them, and then one would imagine that that's going into a pot to then solve those cumulative issues that you're alluding to.
Councillor Warboys.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a question really about targeted questions. From what we've heard and from last year's planning committee, my assumption is that Stowmarket Sewage Treatment Centre is at or above capacity. It's no longer got the capacity to deal with the present outflows. I have a feeling that sewage treatment plant is approaching that, because there's been huge development there, and I can go past the sewage plant regularly and I see no development taking place. I assume it's just as it was 40 years ago. Can we request information regarding development of these sewage treatment plants, specific information as to, we've heard about plans for development. Can we ask for where this development is actually taking place and how it's going to mitigate the current situation?
Sorry, Councillor Warboys, do you mean Anglian water development?
Yes.
Well, I think that when we say targeted questions that we put to Anglian Water in our consultation requests, I mean, they follow the precise wording of the motion. I think if you feel that they're not specific or broad, or indeed broad enough in ambit, then that's something we could potentially look at.
Can I just say that because our guests had to go, if you do have some questions that you want directing at them, I think if you email Alicia, she will actually forward those questions on your behalf.
Yeah, that'd be really useful.
That'd
I think, because
helpful.
I think we could have spent longer here today, but time is a. Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Members, we're now in a period of debate. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Councillor Carter, I can't see you at the back.
My apologies. When playing a game of musical chairs, I cheat with my scooter. Right, I did have a question. When it comes to, we've had this with our statutory bodies or outside bodies where we have the records that they are giving us. What backup, what do we have as a council? What confirmations do we have that the facts and figures that we are getting are accurate? Do we do our own follow-up tests? And what measures do we have if there are outside influences, such as a water runoff going against what they've stated in a planning development, or if they've stated that they can make capacity and it's not? What follow-up measures do we do as a planning body, or do we do if they've stated they're going to make additional sewage things and it doesn't happen? What backup do we have following those? It's sort of a question that's within the rumbling.
Who would like to answer that? Or do you want to answer it between you?
Well, I think in terms of looking at the evidence, that's not one I can answer so well, because clearly it's not necessarily going to be in a planning officer's gift to know whether the figures being presented to them by a statutory consultee or a developer are correct. That's why we rely upon our expert consultees to provide their opinions, such as, for instance, the lead local flood authority in respect of surface water drainage matters. From a local planning authority perspective, if it's the case that a particular strategy for drainage has been approved, and usually that's either through the full plans as part of a planning permission or by approval of details reserved by planning condition, if a developer is not meeting those requirements, then that is potentially an enforcement issue. Thank you.
Councillor Carter, did that answer your question?
I believe so, thank you.
Is that all right? We're now in debate, members. Who would like to start the debate? Councillor Warboys?
Okay, yeah. Yes, I do feel a sense of frustration slightly that we didn't quite get the sort of clarity we wanted. And there are serious public questions about this, really, about the current capacity of Anglian Water to deal with the current outflows, the problems caused by future development. We're in the, as we were told, we're in the driest region, you know, and we were told by, when was it, 2055, we're going to have a new water supply. You know, it is frustrating, and I think, you know, I've tried to push for more clarity in the planning department. I know our planning officers work really hard, and we're bound by statutory regulations. And I think, I'm not certain the public actually understands this, at how our hands are tied. There was a lot of issues about the quality of our river waters, about bathing waters. I visited a sewage outflow in Diss, which I know is outside our area, but it's quite close to me. And it had been water sampled there, which is why I was along from the River Waveney Trust. And there was salmonella in the water. A resident in the garden there said they're not changing the water filters as regularly as they used to. It smells more, and certainly by my own, my own nose told me that that water was really in a terrible state. My concerns are about public safety. I used to swim in rivers. There's certainly some bits of some rivers I wouldn't even touch, never mind going. The water samples were being taken with gloves on, which says enough. My concerns about members of the public. Dogs might go in the water. Children might retrieve balls from the water and become ill as a result of it. There are no public warning notices about these waters or the vicinity of these outflows, which I think is something perhaps we could address as a council with regard to warning the public about specific areas, which I think people know about, but perhaps that knowledge needs to be shared with the public. I'd certainly sort of look, as we go into the local plan and the sort of strategic development and how that relates to water supplies, I realise our officers have got very restricted powers to actually gain more information about what the Water Board is doing to safeguard our water supplies and to deal with the millions of litres of extra sewage that is going into our system. From what Miss Councillor Carter was saying, I just wonder if there is scope for us as a council under freedom of information to get more information from the current strategies of the Water Board and the projected plans. We know the money. We know there's money coming in. I guess the water bill players are going to be paying for it, which I think is the big question I get asked. That people with their water bills, they're paying larger and larger water bills. They're going to be asked to pay for improvements to that supply, and yet I was astounded when it was said that there was no connection between investment and paying shareholders. And I found that quite difficult to put together in my head, really, that people are making a profit but they're not investing. So a sense of frustrated. I'm not quite satisfied we got what we wanted from them. I think this is round one. I think we will have to sort of firm up our questions and perhaps get a round two. So I'll stop now, shall I?
Thank you, Councillor Warboys. Councillor Matheson, you had your hand up. Did you want to comment?
Well, just really to begin to frame one or two recommendations. I mean, I think clearly from what Councillor Warboys just saying, that we recommend that a further set of questions is compiled with contributions from members, either members present or not present, because there's quite a few members of the Scrutiny Committee that were not able to be here today, just to send those to the various organisations, and then subsequently publish those in in the information bulletin of the committee. And the specifics really, I think, just to reiterate the motions from last November, you know, as the new councils, as we are now, and it's reassuring that they are going ahead. And I think there's very specifics really, is that we pick up that point about that wet wipes without plastic are urgently needed, and I quote from Anglian Water, they are the bane of our life, he said. And so I think to chivvy the government up on that point specifically would be something that the council can do. And I wondered whether anybody's able to confirm that the fifth point on the motions was about lobbying local MPs and Ofwat with our concerns about water quality, wishing to see improvements and so on, whether such letters were written and whether answers came back. And it's fortuitous that we have the chair of the district council amongst us today, so he'd be able to write a new round of letters on our behalf, I guess. Whether that has to go through full council or not, I don't honestly know whether that can come straight from this committee or whether we need to get the full council to agree as well. But certainly, I thought it was quite striking how firmly that particular question was answered. Thank you.
Councillor Matheson, we're looking at, you're repeating the motions that were created by the previous administration. For new members, actually on the paper that we've got in front of us, it was quite simple, the invitation to, so I think we need to clarify what it is we want to achieve. But before we go on to the recommendations, are there any other members that would like to just make a comment? Councillor Carruthers.
Yeah, I was just reiterating what I said earlier on about whether or not we can do more to inform the public about not putting stuff down the toilets. I mean, what about signs in public loos on the door? Something, anything to get the message across. And again about you know, water butts, things like that. I mean, it hadn't occurred to me. I have loads of water butts to save water. I hadn't ever thought about it going into the sewage and overflowing it. And I dare say most people don't think about that. So I don't know if there's anything that can come out of this meeting that could improve things. I don't know.
Councillor Marriott.
As regarding this reducing phosphates that they mentioned several times, Hadley, Norton, Elmswell, Sudbury and Debenham, I would like to think that it was going to go out to other areas. This is just a sort of pilot. I think there are lots of areas in Suffolk, in mid-Suffolk, that could do with monitoring at that level. And just a quick word as well, I think we've been given a lot more to worry about, really. The mentions of pathogen levels, liquid oxygen levels, and ammonia levels. So I think where it is possible to do any sort of local testing of water, I think we should investigate that. Thank you.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you. I'd like to share Councillor Rowland's frustration with what we had today as well. As wonderful as the demonstration was at the start, it was a quite distraction from what many questions may have been in the future, given more. Having spoken to the Environment Agency before and knowing what stress we are in at the moment, not able to do testing unless it actually comes through where there's actually a problem, shown a problem. They don't do regular testing and haven't the funds to do so. And having spoken to the rivers trusts, the invertebrates, where they're doing things, and the figures that they are taking, their tests, are not being fed into government figures. There could be a major problem going on and we wouldn't know about it, and we wouldn't know about it until it's too late. So that does concern me. And it concerns me that I myself have fallen into a red herring here with the overflows, concentrating on that, when we don't know the durability of the infrastructure that we have, and could there be other issues going on to increase the nitrates and increase that from the waterworks that aren't just due to water overflow. So I would be very keen to support having them back again in the future. And I did, during the break, manage to show the figures to the Anglian Water, and the quote was, these are the figures that were collected by Suffolk County Council, and the quote was, I don't recognise these figures. So it does mean if we could collect our own data and do a bit more work in advance next time, it's my fault as well. Maybe we have different answers next time round. So I'd support looking at the recommendations of last time, and also support bringing them back again when we've had round one. It'd be nice to get a second punch in.
Thank you, Chair. I think we all need to remember that we represent two large agricultural communities, both Mid-Suffolk and Babergh, and also to some extent our colleagues to the north. Many of the things we've talked about, such as phosphates, ammonia and nitrates, the source of many of these pollutants, if you want to call them pollutants, are coming off the land. And it concerns me to listen to the gentleman, I think it was Nicholas from Natural England, alluding to the points of not having really sufficient support to give to farmers and moving assets from Mid-Suffolk, say, to Waveney Valley and things like that. We need to look really closely at how we support farmers and support the emerging agricultural schemes, not ourselves directly, but through government, and how that can help us, rather than sort of focusing too heavily on what you might call tactical solutions in terms of looking at what's going out of this pipe or that pipe. Clearly, all these things are important, but a strategic view, and also that impacts on our housing stock in terms of the planning permissions we give, and how we manage the outflow from houses in the future. Whether, you know, I mean, I can only speak anecdotally, but 70% of my water is rainwater, because I live in an old house and it goes down the sewer, and Anglian Water have to deal with it. So, you know, there must be quite sensible and realistic options for the future to look at incentivising people who live in older houses or older properties where there isn't a diversion between sort of rainwater and grey or dirty water.
Thanks. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Mr. John Kemp from the River Stour Trust expressed dissatisfaction because he didn't feel Babergh were sufficiently supporting the bid for bathing status. Could we reiterate our support? I personally support it very much. I don't see why we wouldn't. It would ultimately would improve the quality of the river. It would get more regular testing. Can we produce a written endorsement in support of the application?
Can I answer that? Right, I already picked that up, and I want to ask Mark Ems to respond to that, because that was a very public complaint. Mark, do you mind responding to that? Thank you.
Yeah, we're happy to respond to what Mr. Kemp's said during the meeting. We did write back to Mr. Kemp on the 20th of January. Arthur wrote back to him there to say that in principle we support the application, but we just made him aware that it was a complicated issue. We're aware of other stakeholders involved. We haven't heard anything from Mr. Kemp until during this meeting, which, you know, we're very happy to understand more what he wants from us.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he said he felt it was a woolly answer, I think, and I guess he just wanted a more straightforward, yes, we support the application, with no prevarication, unambiguous.
Mark has reassured us he will do something about that and write to Mr. Kemp Oh, sorry. Oh, dear. We've got to put some recommendations together. Can I ask Jan for your professional advice?
So, Councillor, any recommendations? So you're reporting back to Council, because if you remember, it was the motion from Council and they asked Overview and Scrutiny to look at it. So any recommendations you make, you're taking it back to Council. So I would suggest in the first instance that you report back that you've had the meeting and various people attended, and you might wish to take that as part of your Overview and Scrutiny report that you take to Council. That's a way of doing it, but I would suggest that that's the first recommendation, is that you've had the meeting and you can report that back to Council.
Okay. Alicia, would you like to help us with that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Terence.
My apologies. We've had comments regarding the water butts. Could it be a recommendation? We have a large number of properties as council properties, residents. Could we make a recommendation to councils to actually try to supply water butts to council properties, and therefore do our bit in reducing the water overflow?
Chair, can I just come in? So that would actually be a cabinet function. So we're getting into the crossover, but and also because of the financial implications behind that, we would have to do a properly costed report. But you could perhaps ask council to look at ways of promoting the use of water butts amongst staff and their residents, and we may be able to do a campaign.
And perhaps include the wet wipes as well, if we're looking for public action.
Yeah, that we could do a communications, kind of thing for our residents and councillors and staff. If you recommend it to council, that would be okay for that. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Any expenditure or sort of the day-to-day running, like the supplying of water butts, would be a cabinet function. But you could ask council to recommend to the communications team, sort of about the promotion of water butts and not using.
Alicia, we've made it very complex.
Thank you, Chair. So, in terms of the recommendations I have at the moment, and I might need to just take 5 or 10 minutes just as a break to put the wording together for members.
Do you want us to give you that?
I'm quite happy to talk about the points that I've got, and then we can discuss in a break putting the actual wording together. So I have a generic recommendation about thanking the external representatives for their attendance today, and then a recommendation about the chair's report to full council, which will happen at the next full council meetings in October, where yourself and Councillor Caston will be asked to provide a report and a verbal update on the questions that were asked here and the outcomes, so that full council knows that this meeting has taken place. And then I've made notes about recommendations about asking the external representatives for more information, which I know is what has been asked for by Councillor Matheson and Councillor Warboys, and we can put some specifics in there if you would like. Then I've also picked up about Councillor Carter's comments about the water butts, and as well as communication about what can and cannot go into sewage systems as well. So, yes, that would be included.
Can I just say, can you also ask our representatives about the continuation of the phosphate reducing programme, how they can planning to go beyond the original, the towns mentioned?
Yeah, I think that's fine. We can get in contact about that and ask for more information on that. That can also be included potentially in 1.3, the recommendation about going back to them for more information, so we can put that down as a specific for you. Unless members have any other points that they would like formulated into a recommendation.
I think Councillor Warboys was ahead of Councillor Matheson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, we're talking about water, but it hasn't been mentioned, but I think possibly could look at sort of encouraging the use of perhaps grey water systems for flushing toilets, etc., and sort of recycling the water. It might be something that could be put forward to developers in order to sort of conserve fresh, clean water. I'm not sure. Can we put forward as a recommendation that Anglian Water continues to avoid committing itself to providing clear information with regard to the impact of development on sewage systems and water supplies? I think that's what I was hoping for at the beginning of this meeting, that we would get a commitment from Anglia Water, even though it's not statutorily required to give that sort of information, that it would, in the interest of transparency and public goodwill, if you like, that it would provide that clarity about the impact of developments on capacity for dealing with sewage.
Councillor Roberts, can I just ask Stephen or Tom, is that feasible?
Chair, can I assist? So obviously we can ask them to commit to that, but we have no powers whatsoever to enforce that. So we can ask them if they will commit, but if they say no, there's not a lot we can do about it. So, happy for us to ask them to commit to that.
I realise we can't make them.
No.
But I think it's important for our residents to know that we're asking for that information, and they have I think they've got a responsibility to give us that information, and they're avoiding doing so.
So again, we can ask them, but as I say, if they choose not to, there's, it's down to them, and it's their public relations, if you like, not ours. But we haven't got any decision-making powers that we can force them into that. But we could ask them.
Absolutely, I think we need to put the ball in their court.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify, Jan, then? So if we put that in as a recommendation, but it would be the council that would have to
So we would
ask the question.
So you'd ask, if that was a recommendation to council and council agreed that, then you could ask the chair to write to the Anglian Water Authority to ask them if they would commit to that. And actually that would be Councillor Warboys himself. So
I'd be very happy to do that. I will try and phrase it politely.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we're making good progress now, and thank you very much to the officer. In terms of what the chair might write if it was endorsed by council, plastic-free wet wipes, I think is the other key thing that we would want to include, I think. And one final point about the Cabinet spending money part. We've heard a couple of times during the day about what are essentially called citizen science projects, and so I think some modest recommendation that Cabinet considers modest financial support to such projects, because I do know that there are 2 or 3 going on, and other groups that would quite like to, etc., etc. And I've heard both previously about the riverfly approach, and I've just heard from Councillor Smith about what's being done to look at E. coli. So I think there's an interesting area there which it would be good for the districts that we modestly support those if we can afford it. So that would be my point there, finally. Thank you.
I suggest we just give the Alicia a couple of minutes to put it all together. That's quite comprehensive.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I think the other thing that I was asking for a little while ago was, the committee sees the outcome of the fifth and final point of the motion, which was that council lobby MPs and Ofwat with their concerns and about water quality. It would be good to see that come back to the scrutiny committee as to how that went and what happened. If anyone can find out, looking along the back row there.
John, I think we've got a problem, haven't we? Because the present committee hasn't seen that motion complete.
So the motions went to council, didn't they?
They went to councils in the last administration.
In 2022, but we can send a link to that motion and the minutes around that. So if councillors require that reference, of course that's on the website anyway. So it is there.
I just wanted to make a point. I don't know if this affects anything, and I'll look at Jan for this, but I think point 5 on the motion that went in November only relates to mid-Suffolk. I can't see it on...
No, I go.
The same motion went to Babergh Council and got voted on, but I think point 5 is only included on the mid-Suffolk version of the motion and not Babergh, because I can't find it on the Babergh version. So if we do anything about that, it would just be relevant to mid-Suffolk. Yeah.
We're going to... That conversation, Councillor Matheson, will take place outside. Time now to...
Chair, if I could just have 5 to 10 minutes to put some wording together with Jan, and then I'll feed back to the committee the wording, and then we can agree from there, if that's okay.
Do the officers want to stay, or do you want to go? You've had a long morning. Are you happy to stay, or while we read the recommendations out? Nearly there. No, I know we're nearly there. Are you ready? So, Alicia will read out now the recommendations. Oh, you want a 5 to 10 minute break? Sorry. 5-minute break. can I bring the meeting to order, committee members? Thank you. I'm going to ask Alicia to read the recommendations that we think we've finalised now with the help of Jan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. So I have 6 recommendations written up, and I hope that they cover all the points that we've made during questions and debate. So recommendation 1 is just that the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee thanks Anglian Water, the Environment Agency, Natural England and the Riverstore Trust for their attendance and for the answers provided. Recommendation 2, that the chairs of Overview and Scrutiny provide a report and verbal update on the contents and outcomes of the committee meeting at the next full council meetings in October. Recommendation 3, that the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee requests for more information from the external representatives, specifically including the phosphate reducing programme, and asks that this be fed back to the committee via an information bulletin, which should hopefully come in October, should we get all the answers to that. Recommendation 4, that the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee requests for a wider publicity campaign for residents, staff and councillors regarding materials that cannot be put into the sewage system. Recommendation 5, that the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee requests for Cabinet to investigate the possibility of running a campaign regarding the provision of water butts for residents. And recommendation 6 is technically a Mid-Suffolk only recommendation, but that's fine. It's that Mid-Suffolk District Council receives an update on their concerns over water quality in the district from Ofwat, which is what was included in point 5 in the Mid-Suffolk motion from November. So hopefully that covers everything, Chair.
Yeah, it's just whether Cabinet wanted to consider supporting citizen science projects.
If committee are minded to, you could put that request to Cabinet, but it would be for Cabinet to, to decide, but you could put that recommendation to them.
Yeah, so I'm quite happy to include that. So we'll take that as recommendation 7, if you're happy with that.
Okay. And Councillor Carter?
My apologies, just a query on recommendation 1. Thanking them, did we not thank them when they were here? Is it necessary to put it as a recommendation, or could we just not take it as read and do the thanks for attendance?
If I can assist, it's the formal so it'll be it'll be minuted. So it's a formal, although we thank them informally here, the committee will vote on it and it will be a formal record of our thanks. It just puts it formally into the minutes.
Is that all right, Councillor Carter?
Yes, thank you. I'm obviously not being brought up very politely.
I think it makes life more acceptable, really, if you thank people. Any comments on the... Oh, Councillor Warboys.
Yes, I may have missed it, but have I been given a job there to write to Anglian Water?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Sorry, say that.
It's all right, fine. Councillor Matheson's just clarified.
It's got to go through council before...
Right. Everybody happy with those recommendations? Can I have a proposer, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress for you. Chair, could I have your vote verbally, please?
Yeah, my vote's for. Thank you.
Councillor Riley? Thank you. Fab. Thank you, Chair. So that makes 10 votes for. So that's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee members, we still have some other parts of the agenda to follow after that long session. So just before, I'd just like to thank the officers behind me because they've been here all morning. And thank you for all your help. Can we go to item 8? JOS/2316, forthcoming decisions list. Do members have any comments? Do I take that as a no? Yeah, okay, I'm taking that as a no. Item 9, JOS 2317, Overview and Scrutiny Committee Action Tracker. Do members have any comments on that? Can I see her put that tracker together? Is that working well, do you think?
I would say that's not really for me to answer,
Well,
Chair.
no,
it's
I
whether
think
that works
because you
for the committee members.
You put it in place so people would know, because at one time we didn't know where, I mean, for new members, that was something we weren't able to, we weren't sort of catching up with what had gone on or what response had been. So I think I found it exceptionally helpful. So any comments? No. So thank you. The overview and scrutiny action tracker is for noting. Item 10, JOS 2318, Babergh overview and scrutiny work plan. Do Babergh members, so this is for Babergh members only, do you Babergh members have any comments on that? Councillor Riley.
At the last meeting, we asked for an update on Corks Lane and some reference, please, to staffing, agile working and productivity. And you have recorded in the minutes that these suggestions were noted and the conversation would take place with the chairs and officers outside of the meeting. That was 21st of August. I'm surprised that these items have not been put back into the calendar, but appear to have been kicked into the long grass, since, unless they come up, they completely disappear. And I've seen this before with Babergh, and I get very irritated by it all. These are very valid questions. They were approved by the meeting at the time. They were accepted by yourself, and now they have gone. Can they go back, please, in the work plan? There's nothing like a calendar date to focus people's minds on bringing us the information forward. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Riley.
That's fine. Just to pick up on that point, Councillor Riley, that's my fault that that's not on the work plan. That should be under the items to still be timetabled. Just to reassure you that in the last chair's briefing after the last committee, we did discuss the items that you proposed at committee, and we're still having discussions as the best way to bring that forward, and that needs to be talked about with officers how that is going to be presented to the committee. Only after those discussions will we be able to timetable it, but I will make sure that that goes at the bottom of the work plans for the next committee, if not timetabled already. So you shall get an update, hopefully as soon as possible.
Councillor Riley, as I'm part of the chair's briefing, we did discuss that, I can assure you. Item 11, JOS 2319, the Mid-Suffolk Overview and Scrutiny Work Plan. Do Mid-Suffolk members have any comments? I'll take that as a no then. Okay? So the Mid-Suffolk Work Plan is for no too. Well, members, you'd be pleased to know the meeting has now come to an end, and so I am concluding the meeting at 11 minutes past 1. Thank you very much for attending.